Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Was a Todoroki Twin? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. It's very comfy here. It's very soft and floaty and warm. I can feel my side pressed against a solid wall, but it is very soft and safe. I let my arm feel the side, but something out there rubs where I was touching. I pull my arm back, content to lay in here while the thing out there protects me. I snuggle where I am, ready to return to sleep, but something moves. I slowly curl in my arms and legs. Something is touching me. It's small and is poking me, but it does not feel bad. I tilt my head. The poking on my arm feels like one of my fingers, but it is not mine. There must be someone else in here with me. I let them, wondering why they are with me in here. They are bigger than me, but I do not feel scared. I know they will protect me in here like the thing out there will. Big brother is poking me from sleep and I yawn, wondering what has changed. Is the change here or out there? Watch, little brother, he seems to say before kicking the wall. I see something push back from out there and gasp, grabbing Big Brother's hand. What is that? Listen, he tugs the cord connecting me to Mama gently and I do. Hey babies. A sound coos from out there. You're quite active, aren't ya? Gonna have so much fun when you're finally here. This is not Mama's sound, but it is familiar. Big Brother kicks the wall again, and a new sound begins. When will babies be out of your tummy, Mama? Mama laughs, rubbing the wall. Not for a little longer, Natsuo. They still need to grow. I look to Big Brother and smile at the thought. Big Brother is already much bigger than me. He does not need to do more growing or else he might outgrow here. Big Brother must have similar thoughts because he pokes my arm and smiles. I wish they were here now. The sound whines, poking the wall. Can we leave now? I snuggle closer to Big Brother, who repeatedly opens and closes his hand. Maybe we could see Mama if we get to leave here. Big Brother tugs on the cord connecting him to Mama, thinking. Big Brother always knows what to do, and he shakes his head softly. Not yet, little brother. You need to grow. He pokes me for good measure. I sigh, a little impatient, and watch as Big Brother continues kicking the wall. Is it story time, Mama? A third not Mama sound asks, and I feel Big Brother's excitement, kicking much more quickly. I love story time because the Mama sound goes on for a long time. It's very safe and Mama feels very happy. It is not loud and makes me very sleepy. Big Brother always stays awake the whole time, but I get too sleepy to ever hear the end. Big Brother is good at storytelling, though. He always tells me everything Mama has told us during story time, and he always answers my questions. I think so, Fiumi. The little guys are getting impatient. There is a gentle pat from out there and we shift as Mama moves. Big Brother lets go and we drift apart slightly. Mama breathes a little harder during moving, but Big Brother and I know that Mama is okay. When Mama stops moving, Big Brother shifts back to my side and we get ready for story time. Are you coming to sit Tsuya? Mame sound asks, and there is movement beside Mama. Mama laughs, shifting to get comfortable. Comfy? A grunt responds to Mama, and story time begins. Once upon a time, in a land without quirks, a little boy lived with his mother. Mama was the best storyteller, and Mama's voice was very soothing. A yawn escaped me and I tried to hide it from Big Brother, but nothing gets past Big Brother. Go to sleep, he brushes my hand, but I shake my head stubbornly. I want to know what the boy does next. Another yawn escapes me and Big Brother insists. He pulls me closer and his fingers move over my eyes. So I nod and drift off to sleep. I let Mama's sound wash over me and Big Brother's presence keep me safe. Ray, where are you? I jolt awake and Big Brother frowns, kicking the wall in displeasure. It is the angry sound that makes Mama scared and sad. Neither of us like the angry sound because it hurts Mama, but we can't do anything from here. Mama rubs the wall soothingly, but Big Brother doesn't stop. The angry sound gets louder as it approaches Mama, and Mama tells the others to go to their rooms. The others leave Mama to face the angry sound, but Big Brother and I are here for Mama. There you are. What have you been doing with the children? We don't need their failures sticking with my projects. The angry sound approaches Mama and Mama is very scared. Big Brother rests his hand on the wall and I do the same. They are not failures, NG. Mama's sound is sharp and I'm glad Mama is on our side. They are our children. There is a huff from the angry sound and Mama is moved harshly. I can feel Big Brother getting upset as he firmly pushed both hands on the wall. I join him, trying to help Mama, but I'm very scared too. The angry sound is very scary and he always makes Mama sad. When I'm out there, I'll protect Mama from the angry sound. One look at Big Brother tells me he will do the same. It is very tight in here with Big Brother. He takes up a lot of room but he tries to make sure I have room too. It's okay though, because Big Brother is bigger than me so he can have more space in here. Big Brother has turned so his head is away from mine, but I can't move to copy him. Big Brother tells me something is changing. He thinks we're going to be joining Mama in out there soon. He's probably right. Big Brother hasn't been wrong yet, and Mama hasn't been moving as much. At least the angry sound is not with us often, but I like it when the others are with Mama. They make her very happy. There are a lot more others touching Mama now. They say a lot of big words that make my head hurt, but Big Brother tells me not to worry about them. We'll learn out there, he reassures me. For the past little while now, there has been a lot of pressure coming from Mama. It squeezes Big Brother and I for a bit before releasing. Big Brother says it's time for us to go out there, but I am scared. I hold on to the cord from Mama and Big Brother tells me he will go first to make sure it is safe. He is a good Big Brother, wanting to protect me, and I nod as he disappears from here. It takes a long time and Mama makes hurt sounds. I can hear the angry sound in the room, but he does not make Mama hurt. He says nice words to Mama as she brings Big Brother to out there. I wait until he has left but I still do not move after he is gone from here. Mama is not squeezing anymore, and I do not know how to follow Big Brother. Big Brother left here with his head first, but my feet are where his head was. Before I can figure it out, someone presses on the wall, helping me move towards the out there. I slowly move so my head is facing where Big Brother left, and once I'm ready Mama is too. She begins squeezing again and I feel myself leaving here. I can't wait to see Big Brother again. And meet Mama. It's very bright as I enter the out there. I'm very sleepy though and can't help Mama at all. It is loud out there, or I guess this is now here. I briefly feel the cold when I am no longer in there but I cannot cry out to Big Brother or Mama. It is very hard to open my eyes and I want to go back to the old here. Hands that are bigger than Big Brother's are holding me and they carefully place something in my nose. It takes stuff out of my throat and I cry for Mama and Big Brother. They will know what to do. A sound leaves me but it quickly stops and I can't make any sounds. What's happening? What's wrong with my baby? Mama's sound is very scared and loud and I want to let Mama know it's okay but I can't make any sounds. Sorry, Big Brother. Sorry, Mama. I let the sleepy feeling take me. A familiar pressure lies next to me, poking my arm. I open my eyes and see Big Brother, though it is very bright and I whine, closing them. Big Brother pulls me towards him and I feel very safe. There is something wrong. I can't feel Mama with us and I don't know where she is. Is she with the others? Is she with the angry sound? Big Brother must know. I grab his arm, though my grasp is much weaker than his, and feel a hum in my throat. Where's Mama? He answers with a hum of his own, and that's enough for now. They were always seen together for the first 3 years of their lives. If any of the Todorokis were to walk into the nursery, it would be no surprise to see a head of red and white snuggled closely to one of light pink. Although there were 2 cribs nestled in the room, it was unthinkable to have the 2 brothers apart. The larger twin would usually have his arms wrapped around the other in a protective way, and a tantrum would be guaranteed if you were to try and separate them. NG had learned this the hard way, wanting to have a quirk specialist look over his sons to see if they could determine what their quirks would be. He had not learned about their quirks, with them being so young, but he was anxious to know. None of his children had pink hair, a perfect blend of his and Ray's hair colors, or had a half-red, half-white look which only further pushed NG's curiosity. This could only mean great things for his projects, in his eyes. Shudo never strayed far from little Izuku, even though he was the first to be able to sit up and start crawling. Shudo was always trying to help his little brother with everything, whether it be shoving food towards his brother's mouth or attempting to drag him across the floor to see Rei. Both were quiet babies, something Rei was often thankful for. She had lived through the terror that was Natsuo and the trials of Tuya as her first child. She liked to think it was because the twins had each other that allowed them to be so calm. Whenever a distressed whine would sound from one of them, the other was quick to reach towards their brother to comfort them. Shudo's method was to continuously poke Izuku until he settled down, while Izuku usually flopped himself across his brother in some semblance of a hug. She took multiple pictures of a disgruntled Shudo being squished by his smaller brother. Though, not everything ran smoothly for the twins. There was an obvious difference between the brothers when looking at them side by side. Shudo was much bigger than his younger twin, and his looks were much harsher as well. His hair was flat and his features resembled his father more than his mother. Izuku, on the other hand, was significantly smaller and had softer features. His pink hair was fluffy and he had a delicate air to him that Shudo did not. He was also prone to sickness, more so than his brother, and it worried everyone to no end when the youngest got sick, especially Shudo, who would cry in distress at having to be separated so he did not fall sick as well. Rei was especially worried for Izuku. They had nearly lost him in the hospital and he seemed so weak compared to his twin. He was also developing slower than Shudo, and Rei hoped Enji would have the sense to leave the boys to their own devices, at least until Izuku was stronger. Her other children adored their new siblings. As long as Izuku and Shudo were in eyesight of each other, or more preferably within arm's length, they were willing to be coddled and manhandled to anyone's content. Natsuo, 5 years older than the twins, loved rolling a ball towards them and they rolled it back. Rei found it endearing when either Shudo or Izuku would pass it to the other for them to roll it back. Usually it was Izuku who urged the older twin to roll it back, and giggled manically when Natsuo received it. When Shudo rolled it to Izuku, the smaller baby couldn't roll it as far but it didn't deter Shudo from giving him applause. Fuyumi, 8 years old, loved playing dress-up. It was unfortunate that Izuku was the only one who could tolerate the attention for this, but Shudo was happy just watching his brother play with their older sister. Shudo could be convinced if Izuku gave him the right look, but Shudo was adamant about not wearing dresses. Tuya, the oldest Todoroki at 10 years of age, rarely saw the boys as he was often subjected to his father's training regime. However, for the short time he had with them, he loved reading stories, cuddling them in his lap as they pointed at the pictures and cooed. Enji had no time for them, claiming they were not of use until he knew their quirks, which left Rei feeling grateful but also disheartened. She loved all of her children, and she hated that this man was only using them for his own self-interest. Poor Tuya was stuck with him for the majority of the day, training his quirk in an effort to succeed all might, but Enji was not known for his patience or compassion. More often than not, Rei was left to pick up the pieces and stitch them back together as Tuya sobbed in her arms. What she wouldn't give to take them away. Good morning, Shudo. Good morning, Izuku. Rei's voice was soft as she gently lifted the whimpering babes into her arms. Fuyumi was with her, making sure the 2 changing tables were set up before taking Izuku from her mother's arms. Shudo reached for his brother, letting out a whine to show his displeasure and was hushed by his mother. You're okay, Shudo. You'll be back with Izuku soon. Rei tried to placate the older twin as she changed him but he kicked at her in response. Izuku watched his older sister with watery eyes, whining and shifting around in discomfort. Luckily for Fuyumi, she was adept at changing the smaller boy and was quickly lifting him back into her arms to reunite him with his twin. Rei skillfully held each of her sons in her arms, taking them to the dining room to be deposited. Once they were strapped into their seats, Shudo banged on his tray a few times and babbled, prompting Izuku to do the same. Natsuo was already at the table, eating his breakfast and making faces at the twins as their mother prepared breakfast for the babies. Fuyumi has settled across from Natsuo to begin eating, ruffling Izuku's hair to make him squeal. Rei returned with their food, kissing their foreheads as she set their plates in front of them. Shudo wasted no time in jamming his entire hand into the rice, a concentrated look on the 1-year-old's face. Izuku, on the other hand, stared at Rei patiently, waiting for her to feed him. "Here you go, Zuzu." She scooped up a small portion of rice and a small slice of vegetable before giving it to him. Izuku chewed slowly, his cheeks chubbier with the added mass in his mouth. Shudo peered over and poked his brother's cheek. After breakfast, Natsuo and Fuyumi were ushered away to meet with their tutors. Natsuo whined briefly before Fuyumi grabbed his hand and dragged him away. Rei smiled gratefully after them and Fuyumi beamed in response. Rei cleaned up the twins' faces with a washcloth, laughing quietly as Izuku pouted at having to go first. Once they were cleaned and the dishes were returned to the kitchen, she carried her babies to the living room and set them on the floor with various toys and a big, fluffy blanket. Izuku immediately flopped onto his stomach, giggling as he tugged at Shudo's arm and babbled at his brother to lay with him. Shudo gave a huff and a muttered "zoo" sound before laying down with his brother. Izuku impatiently shoved some of the colored blocks his way. Shudo expertly as a 1-year-old could stack one of the blocks on top of each other, prompting Izuku to mumble to himself as he tried to stack a third block. Rei sat in the couch in front of them, grabbing a novel she had started last night. She kept one eye on the twins, though they rarely got into trouble, and the other on her novel. The twins played together, soft giggles escaping them as their block tower repeatedly fell over. Shudo was poking Izuku in an attempt to make him push their block tower over when a large bang echoed throughout the house. "When you are done being a disappointment, come find me." Rei leaped to her feet as the Izuku grabbed tightly onto Shudo's shirt. What the hell was that? Seconds later, a timid Tuya with tear-stained cheeks entered the room. His shirt was burned in various places on his arms, which were curled tightly around himself. Rei felt her heart clench at the sight. "Mom dash," he choked out and Rei quickly brought him into her arms, hushing him as she stroked his hair. "Shoo, baby, it's okay. It's okay. I'll go talk to your father. You watch the twins, yeah?" She moved the sweaty hair from his face as he nodded hesitantly. Rei gently kissed his forehead before walking out of the room. Tuya collapsed onto the couch, curling his knees to his chest and tried to breathe. It wasn't his fault. It wasn't his fault. His stupid quirk was dysfunctional and he doesn't know why his father is so angry. He's trying his best but his flames hurt so bad if he's not careful and… Tuya! His head whipped up to see Shudo, holding onto the table for dear life as he made his way to his older brother. He shuffled a few steps at an agonizingly slow pace, but his face was determined as he mumbled his older brother's name over and over. Izuku was sat on the blanket, watching the affair and offering his own comments of, "too," as Shudo inched closer to the couch. Tuya felt a watery smile grace his lips as he reached forward and picked Shudo up to sit him on the couch. Izuku, not one to be willingly left behind, crawled to Tuya's legs and tugged on his breathes. Tuya lifted him up as well, nestling him onto his lap so Izuku was facing him. Izuku fell forward, giving Tuya the biggest hug he could while Shudo pressed his little body against his left side. He also poked his arm for good measure. Tuya hid his face in Izuku's hair, feeling his tears soak into the strands. After a few moments, Shudo began angrily chanting "duh," which suspiciously sounded closer to "die." Not that Tuya was complaining. When it felt significantly easier to breathe, he shifted Izuku to his right leg so Shudo could sit on his left and hug them both. The twins cooed in response, giggling as they kissed his cheeks with their slobber. "Tuya," Shudo said firmly, shifting on his brother's leg and Izuku nodded adamantly in agreement. Tuya chuckled, pressing a kiss to each of their cheeks and sighed. "You two are so smart." Maniacal laughter answered him and he smiled involuntarily. Tuya would attend training every day just so father would do nothing to these kids. He would do anything for them. Izuku woke up cold. It was unusual for the youngest Todoroki to be shaking when he woke up, accustomed to cuddling with Shudo through the night. He whined as he felt beside him for his brother, only to feel the cool sheets meet his touch. Izuku rolled himself off the bed, huffing in confusion when there was no sign of Shudo. He laid on his stomach to peer under their bed, mumbling "Toto," but receiving no response. He tugged on his hair slightly, wondering where his brother had gone when usually if he were to get up, he would wake Izuku up as well. The next step he took was towards their closet. Maybe Shudo was looking for something? He nodded his head as he opened the door, but there was no sign of his twin. There was nowhere else Shudo could be in their room, so Izuku made his way to the kitchen, a hand firmly planted in his hair in distress. Was Shudo hungry? Was he sick? Was he hurt? Why wasn't he with Izuku? He quickened his pace to the kitchen, trying to listen for his brother at every room he passed. When he finally arrived at the kitchen, the 3-year-old sighed in relief. There was his brother, sitting with Tuya and eating breakfast. Zuku! Shudo grinned and waved, but his voice was still quiet. Izuku toddled over to sit in his usual seat. Once situated, Tuya gently removed his hand from his hair, giving him a soft smile. You hungry, Izuku? Do you want me to serve you some rice? Izuku nodded at his oldest brother, watching him stand and walk over to the cabinets to grab a bowl. It was quiet this morning, more so than usual, and Izuku wanted to know why. He also wanted to know why Shudo was not with him this morning. Where were you? Izuku asked his twin. Why was Shudo not with him this morning? Shudo frowned in concentration, thinking. Izuku didn't mind waiting for him to answer, because Shudo always understood what Izuku was trying to ask. After a few more minutes, Shudo responded. I was already awake and Tuya wanted to eat with me. Izuku traced his finger on the table. First a circle, then a square, then a triangle, and repeated the gesture. Why? Shudo shrugged, spooning a mouthful of rice into his mouth. Dunno. He doesn't get to eat with us, lot. Must be lonely. Lonely? Izuku nodded solemnly, but also pointed to himself in hopes of getting his point across. Sorry, Otudo. I'll wake you up next time and we can all eat together. Izuku hummed, rocking in his chair, pleased at the promise his brother gave him. He thanked Tuya when he returned with a bowl of plain rice. The trio silently finished their meals and Tuya cleaned their dishes up. Shudo sat in his chair, swinging his legs as he waited for Tuya's return, while Izuku watched the clock on the wall, tilting his head side to side in time with the sound. Tuya came back and laughed quietly at the sight. Hey kiddos. Father took Mama out for the day so we can hang out and do whatever we want. Tuya's smile was big and Shudo and Izuku cheered at the announcement. Fuyumi and Natsuo too? Shudo asked and Tuya nodded. All of us will play games and we'll do a lot of fun things while they're out. We'll wake him up. Shudo promised and jumped from his chair. He offered a hand to Izuku, who hesitantly took it and allowed himself to be dragged to their siblings' room. Fuyumi was first, and Shudo had the honor of knocking on her door. A few seconds passed in silence before their rumpled-looking sister was revealed. She yawned, rubbing her eyes. Is something wrong, Shudo? Shudo shook his head. Father and Mama are gone and Tuya said we could have a fun day. She smiled softly, tucking her hair behind her ear. Izuku was staring at her hand, waiting for an answer. Well, that does sound fun. How about I get dressed and I'll meet you? 2 in the living room? The twins nodded and soon made their way to Natsuo's room. Shudo offered Izuku to knock, but he shook his head in the negative. Shudo shrugged and knocked, feeling his hand bounce slightly as Izuku rocked on his heels. There was no answer and Shudo slowly opened the door. Peering inside, the twins saw Natsuo sleeping on his bed, the blankets on the floor and his pillow at his feet. He was snoring away, his appendages spread eagle on the bed. Shudo dragged Izuku to his bed and helped him up. Shudo grunted softly as he helped the smaller boy climb into the bed. Izuku shuffled over so Shudo could join him and they shook Natsuo away gently. Natsuo's eyes blearily took in his little brother's and he groaned, grasping for a blanket to cover his head that wasn't there. Go away, Natsuo mumbled, wondering in his sleepy state why his brother would choose to wake him up and not Fuyumi or Mama. Fun day. Izuku informed him and Natsuo opened one eye with a soft, huh. Shudo nodded enthusiastically. Mama and Father are gone and Tuya's waiting downstairs. The 8-year-old sighed softly, fighting the urge to fall back asleep and lifted himself into a seated position. Izuku watched silently beside Shudo as their brother walked to his closet to get dressed. Natsuo took his time, pulling a striped shirt over his head and glancing back at his brothers. They were attempting to put his bed back together with the blankets folded properly and the pillow returned to its proper place, but all they managed to do was entangle Izuku in the blankets with the pillow now on the other side of the room. Natsuo snorted, walking over to the smaller boy to help him out of the blankets. Izuku sneezed in response, and allowed his hair to be ruffled as Natsuo made his bed. Shudo retrieved the pillow and handed it to his brother, and impatiently waited for his own head pats. Once his room was in sorts, he led the twins back to the living room where Tuya was setting up various bagoma tops on the little table. Natsuo joined Fuyumi in the kitchen to eat a quick breakfast while Shudo and Izuku sat across from their oldest brother. Shudo picked one up curiously, tilting it left and right before handing it to Izuku for him to inspect. When Fuyumi and Natsuo get in here, we're gonna see who can last the longest. The teenager smiled at his brothers, excited for the day he had planned. They played with the toys for a while, giggling as each bagoma came to a stop and someone won. Fuyumi was the usual winner, and after Natsuo's 10th complaint they decided to move on. Let's go outside. It's really nice out today, Tuya said after they had put away the toys. Natsuo smiled widely, jumping to his feet and running to the back door to put his shoes on. Tuya put a hand on Shudo's back to urge him forward and Fuyumi grabbed Izuku's hand. Natsuo was waiting impatiently by the door, trying and failing to shove Shudo's shoes on his feet. Tuya took over, helping him with his shoes before the Todoroki children entered the backyard. It was quite large, though anyone wouldn't be surprised at the sight. If you knew the number 2 hero, you would know that Endeavor never settled for anything less than grand. There were trees lining the fence that lined the property, swishing silently in the breeze, and bushes that were meticulously trimmed every few days by the hands Enji had hired to care for the outside. There was a small koi pond in the back corner of the property that Rei loved taking her children to see. The first time she had been able to take all of her children there at the same time was when Tuya has tripped and fell into the pond, but not before dragging Fuyumi and Natsuo in with him. It was the first time they heard Izuku laugh, and it was one of their happier memories as a family. Any suggestions for what we want to do? Tuya asked his siblings and Natsuo jumped in place. Soccer. He squealed, running off to grab the ball they owned and returning. Sure, Squirt. Tuya smiled at his brother. I'm taller than you, Natsuo deadpanned and Tuya mock-pouted. Not by much. What will we use for nets? Fuyumi interjected before the brothers could bicker further. We could use our shoes. Tuya swiftly took his off and set them apart. Kick the ball between the shoes to score a point. Natsuo took off his own shoes to set up the opposing net, taking care to try and match them up with his older brother. After receiving a thumbs up, he returned to Tuya's side. What are the teams? Shudo asked. Can I be on Tuya's team? Please. Natsuo begged. Sure, but then that means Fuyumi gets both of the twins. Is that fair? It wasn't fair, not really. Having the 2 older boys against their sister and 2 3-year-olds was anything but fair. However, they all knew the point of playing wasn't about fairness but having fun. Fuyumi smiled as the twins moved to stand on either side of her. We're gonna kick your butts? Not if we do it first. Natsuo taunted and dropped the ball on the ground to begin the game. The game was evidently more of a 2-on-1 where Natsuo and Tuya dribbled circles around their siblings. Shudo squealed in delight as he chased after the ball, kicking it as soon as he came near the object. Fuyumi laughed as Tuya exaggerated missing the ball Shudo kicked, allowing the young boy to score a point. Izuku followed his twin with his eyes, though often getting distracted to pick up blades of grass. All of the Todorokis were watching the small boy, careful to not kick the ball in his direction or run him over. At one point, Izuku sat on the ground in the middle of their playing field to throw grass in the air. He would watch the pieces flutter to the ground before picking more up and repeating. Shudo quickly grew tired from running back and forth, choosing to lay down beside his brother, breathing. He watched Izuku repeatedly throw the grass in the air, a concentrated look in his eyes as he watched them float down. Eventually, the rest of the Todoroki children joined them. Natsuo flopped down beside Shudo to catch his breath, a smile gracing his features. Fuyumi sat down by Izuku, a few flowers in her lap as she began creating a flower crown. Tuya situated himself against a nearby tree, watching his siblings look happier than they had in a long time. They sat together for a few hours, enough for Tuya to join his sister in making flower crowns and helping make each one for each sibling. Izuku flapped his hands in delight at seeing his blue and yellow flowers intertwined with one another. He felt the soft petals between his fingers as it rested gently on his head. Shudo was smiling as he twirled around in his flower crown, showing off the pink flowers decorating his hair. Once it was lunchtime, Tuya went inside to grab the food he made this morning for lunch and brought it out. They thanked the oldest Todoroki before digging in, taking turns telling jokes they made up on the spot. "What do you call a dinosaur that is sleeping?" Natsuo asked, grinning at his older brother. "I dunno. What do you call a dinosaur that is sleeping?" "A dino snore." "That is an awful pun." Fuyumi laughed before taking another bite. "How do we know that the ocean is friendly?" Tuya asked the group. "Friendly?" Izuku titled his head in question. "It waves." Tuya let out an undignified snort. Shudo laughed with him, waving his hand at Izuku. "Your turn, Zuku." Shudo urged his twin and Izuku sat silently for a moment. The three older Todorokis waited patiently for the youngest to speak, curious as to what he would say. Izuku seemed to be having a conversation with himself, his hands flying a mile a minute that held no meaning to anyone but the smaller boy. His eyes looked around at the yard before he nodded his head. "What is brown and sticky?" he asked. Shudo stuck a finger in his mouth, thinking hard about the answer. Natsuo looked around the yard, hoping to see something that inspired Izuku's joke. Fuyumi and Tuya made eye contact, both equally confused as to what the answer to Izuku's question could be. Their younger brother was known for being straightforward and having jokes and puns fly over his head, so what would Izuku say the answer is? "What's brown and sticky, Zuku?" Shudo asked, giving up after a brief 30 seconds. Izuku held up something in his hands. "A stick." Tuya blinked at the stick in his little brother's hold, letting the answer sink in before dissolving into laughter. The others were quick to join in, Natsuo clutching his stomach as he rolled onto his side. Izuku smiled at his siblings and Tuya couldn't imagine a more perfect day. Fuyumi took her turn to tell a joke, prompting another round of laughter from the children. Shudo took off his flower crown to sniff the flowers, wanting to know what the pretty pink plants smelled like. After one sniff, he sneezed and his left side erupted into flames and his right was encased in ice. It was deadly silent. Tuya barely registered the flames liking his shirt as he stared at his younger brother in horror. Izuku shuffled closer to his brother once the flames died out and the ice melted off his body. "Hurt?" Izuku questioned, running his fingers down the side of Shudo's arm. "It's my quirk, Zuku." Shudo stared at his hands in awe, waving them around in an attempt to make it appear again. Izuku nodded. Half cold, half hot. Tuya felt like he was going to be sick. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't real. He couldn't take his eyes off Shudo, who was still trying to make the flames or ice appear. Fuyumi was deathly pale, as was Natsuo, as they stared at the oblivious twins. "Shuto," Tuya found his voice, but it was barely above a whisper. Shudo turned to his brother, smiling wide. "I got my quirk." "Yes," Tuya nodded, swallowing. "But we can't let father know, okay?" There was a beat. But why, Tuya? Shudo's eyes were wide and innocent, and Tuya felt his heart clench. "Well, you know how I don't get to see you very often?" Tuya bit his lip, trying to think of a way to say what he wanted to without traumatizing his little brothers. "Well, father keeps me away from you because of my quirk." Shudo pouted, clearly conflicted on what his older brother was telling him. While it was true that they didn't get to see Tuya very often, and he knew how his father acted towards everyone, maybe his quirk would make father kinder. "He might take you away from Izuku." Natsuo interjected, seeing the contemplative look on the little boy's face. Shudo looked positively stricken, tears pricking the edges of his eyes. Natsuo felt guilty for saying so, but everyone knew it was true. If Shudo really did have a quirk that encompassed both the fire and ice from their parents, then their father would finally have his perfect weapon and would surely isolate him from the rest of the family. "Toto stays," Izuku said firmly, grabbing his twin's arm in a tight grasp in one hand while the other gripped the grass beside him. "I can't leave Zuko. I won't. Not ever." Shudo sobbed. Fuyumi pulled Shudo into her lap, shushing the boy. "It's okay, Shudo. Father wouldn't separate you two. He knows how much you love each other." Natsuo and Tuya share a look, knowing that their father didn't quite care for sentiment. "As long as you don't show father your quirk, he won't have a reason to separate you two." Shuto nodded desperately, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. He crawled out of Fuyumi's lap to hug Izuku, nearly crushing him. "Won't leave you, Zuku. Promise." Izuku hugged him back just as tightly. Tuya felt like crying himself but forced the tears away. Everything would be okay for now. He could protect his brothers a little longer. "Get up, boy." Tuya snapped awake, blearily taking in the sight of his father's flaming beard. There was an ache in his ribs and he forced his throat to prevent a hiss from escaping. He got to his feet without a thought, going through the motions of getting dressed for training and following his father silently. There were no words exchanged. The only movement from his father was the pass of something to eat. Tuya wasted no time devouring it, knowing if it wasn't gone by the time they reached their destination it would be taken from him. Tuya finished the food in record time, feeling his stomach churn with anxiety. The clock they passed told him it was 4 in the morning. The training room door was slammed open and Tuya vainly prayed it did not wake his siblings. Tuya glanced around the room, hoping to see something that would indicate the kind of training he would have today. "Father go." Endeavor locked the door behind them and got into a fighting stance, and Tuya wanted to sob. Tuya had 3 seconds to prepare himself before a wave of flames was shot towards him. He rolled out of the way on reflex, wasting no time to get to his feet to dodge another attack. The 4th attack from Endeavor caught Tuya's clothes on fire, and he needed to deal with both the flames liking his skin as well as the man in front of him. Well, was his shirt really that important? He hissed as he ripped his shirt off, throwing it to the side. In that split second, Endeavor lit up his fist and aimed a punch at Tuya's torso. It hurt. Tuya was thrown across the room, gasping for air as he shakily rose to his feet to dodge another attack. The fight, or rather one-sided beatdown, lasted a few hours with Tuya feeling the strain of his quirk under his skin, begging to be released. He stubbornly kept it down. Endeavor mostly used his fists in a fight, so Tuya knew he didn't need to prepare for an attack from below. He twisted away from a shot of flames, the heat grazing his face as if to taunt him. Endeavor threw another punch and Tuya slipped through his defense to land one of his own. Tuya breathed as he tried to get away, feeling the heat of Endeavor's hell flames seep into his skin, boiling his blood. There was a crazed look in Endeavor's eyes as he laughed, his fingers softly running over the spot Tuya hit him. The next second, Tuya found himself flying through the air, hitting the wall with a solid thump and an annoying ringing in his left ear. He couldn't fight back. It was impossible. The flames were too hot for him to get close, and even when he managed to land a hit on Endeavor, he would never be granted the chance for a second one. "Use your quirk, Tuya," Endeavor demanded, kicking his son, who was still down on the floor. Enji stood over him, fury in his veins. While Tuya wasn't the most ideal successor, he was the only one his wife granted him. His siblings had ice quirks, useless for battle, and the newest additions had yet to manifest any sort of power. Tuya was the only one granted a fire quirk that rivaled Enji's own. It was an amazing fire quirk, perfect for heroics, more powerful than hell flames, but his son refused to use it, to train it, and become stronger. How do you expect to amount to anything in this world if you don't use your quirk? He just needed to find the right motivation. His own consisted of wanting to be the best by his own merit. He wanted to surpass all those that stood in his way and become recognized for his efforts. He knew it would not come easy. Enji forced himself to train and study for hours on end so that he could rise in the ranks and become the #1 pro hero, but evidently this didn't motivate his son in the same way. "Get off the ground and fight like a man." Enji glowered at the boy on the ground, wondering how someone so weak-willed came from himself. Tuya met his gaze with a scowl, failing to push himself off the ground. Enji huffed, hauling the boy to his feet and dragging him to the center of the room. There was potential for Tuya to succeed him. If he could force Tuya to use his quirk, there would be no stopping his son from surpassing All Might. Tuya was roughly deposited on the ground. His chest ached from bruises and burns old and new. He knew what Endeavor wanted from him, what he craved more than anything, and would stop at nothing to achieve it. And he wouldn't give it to him. Wanna be stubborn? Fine. I'll give you reason to use your quirk. Tuya was on his stomach, dazed from the sudden movement. Endeavor had him pinned to the ground, and although struggling was useless, Tuya frantically pushed against the weight against him with no results. His left arm was slowly being bended in a direction that was not meant for the human arm to bend. Tuya moved with renewed vigor. Fear clogged his throat as he tried everything to push Endeavor off him. Use your quirk to escape, or face the consequence of your weakness. If only it were that simple. Tuya felt a whimper grow in his throat but pushed it down. There was no escape from Endeavor, except the one thing he least wanted to do. His arm was far past his limit, and any second now he would hear it crack. Tuya felt the burning pain flare through his arm as the weight on his back disappeared. His sight whitened, but he didn't let it stop him from scrambling away from Endeavor. He smelled burning flesh and gagged. See? That wasn't so hard. Tuya was vibrating, but forced himself to meet Endeavor's gaze. It was piercing, starving, craving more than what Tuya could give. Tuya winced as he rubbed his arm, hopelessly urging the pain away. At the very least, physical training was over. Endeavor moved on to quirk training, forcing Tuya to burn through various materials with his flames. He kept this up for an hour, watching his skin manifest burn marks up and down his arms. Endeavor slapped him on the back. Lunch. 10 minutes. Then school work. He left the training room, as well as his son lying on the floor. Shudo looked at the soba in front of him, the steam swirling in the air. Mama was trying to make Izuku eat, but his brother didn't want to. He was whining and shaking his head back and forth, but Shudo didn't understand why. Did he not like the food Mama made? Eat, Zuku. Shudo poked his little brother's side, only to revive a high-pitched whine as Izuku's fists hit the table. What's the matter, honey? Mama asked, though she looked very sad and scared. There was silence. Hot. Izuku finally said, Do you feel hot? Mama laid the back of her hand on Izuku's forehead, but he pushed it away. Hot. Fuyumi bit her lip in confusion. What's hot, Zuku? Izuku let out a huff of frustration, a hand gripping his pink hair tightly. Hot. We can't help if you don't say what you need. Natsuo grumped and Shudo glared at him. He didn't need to sound so mean. Izuku's bleary eyes looked to Shuto desperately. Hot. Shudo ran through the options. Izuku said something was hot, but they didn't know what. Izuku himself wasn't hot, so he wasn't sick. Maybe the room was too warm? Is the room too hot? Shudo asked, and Izuku shook his head. Shudo looked at his brother closely. The only thing hot was, is the food too hot? Izuku nodded, pointing at the bowl. Too hot. He repeated. Mama looked relieved and she laughed. That's okay, little Zuzu. We can just blow on it like this. Mama picked up Izuku's fork and blew onto it. Or, if you ask nicely, I'm sure your siblings can use their quirks to dash. I can do it, Mama. Shudo cheered before standing on his chair and placing his right hand on Izuku's bowl. Ice quickly encased the food and Mama stared in shock. Izuku poked the ice block experimentally with his finger before looking at his brother. Thank you, he nodded sincerely. He looked to his older siblings, eager to see what they would think about him being so helpful, but they looked sick. Are you okay? Shudo whispered. Did he do something wrong? Mama quickly came to his side and held his right hand gently. She was smiling and looked very happy. Your quirk came in, honey. Isn't that amazing? Shudo lit back up, forgetting about the expressions his older siblings had. He missed Natsuo's frantic gestures as he turned to smile at Mama. I can also do this. He raised his left hand and made small flame dance on his palm. It's like you and Father. Mama, a look of happiness, also got the sick look on her face, staring at his left hand. Shuto, she began softly. We can't tell your father about this. Promise me you won't. Shudo's smile dropped as he stared at his Mama's hands clenching his own. I already told Tina I wouldn't. Rei let out a big breath, a smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes. Thank goodness for Tuya. That's good, but can you pinky promise Mama? She watched her little boy bounce in his seat as he offered his tiny pinky to her. She wrapped her own around his, kissing their fingers and allowing him to do the same before releasing. She turned to her other children, but Natsuo spoke first. We already know. He sneezed and we saw it last week. She nodded. Has Izuku shown signs of dash? Fuyumi shook her head. Not yet, but if Shudo has his, then Izuku shouldn't be too far behind. We'll keep an eye on him. Natsuo promised, and Rei felt her heart grow. Rei looked over at Shudo, who was using his left side to defrost Izuku's lunch. She felt a ridiculous urge to yank Izuku away from his twin, but forced her hands to her side. It was irrational. Her 3-year-old posed no threat to the youngest Todoroki, so there was no reason why she would want to pull Izuku into her lap and shield him away. To an I. Izuku cheered, delighted to see his second favorite sibling. Rei flinched at the sight of her oldest. He was covered in burn marks and was cradling his left arm in his right. There was a bruise beginning to form on the left side of his face, and his lips was split. There were tear-stained tracks on his cheeks, but he smiled at the sight of the twins. Hey, munchkins. He ruffled Izuku's hair as he passed and reached out to Shudo's before his eyes set on the half-melted ice block. His eyes frantically met Rei's sputtering nonsense words in her direction, but she stood to soothe him. I know. It's all right. Your father won't have to know about this. Tuya let out a shuddered breath, then coughed. Alarmed, Rei inspected her son's arms and gently guided him into the kitchen to dress his wounds. It was silent between the two, both listening to Shudo talk about some new hero that debuted yesterday to his older siblings, with them humming in all the appropriate places. Rei gently applied burn cream to his arms, but Tuya barely registered, staring off into nothing behind Rei's shoulder. His eyes looked haunted, exhausted, and Rei hated herself for being unable to do anything about it. I only have 3 more minutes. Tuya whispered, as if saying the words aloud would bring upon a curse. Rei stroked his cheek and he leaned into her hand, eyes closed. I'll talk to your father if he comes. You just worry about eating. Tuya's eyes snapped open and looked like he was going to protest, but Rei simply kissed his forehead. Everything will be okay. Rei left Tuya to grab a serving of hot soba before returning to the dining room. She paused, seeing that Natsuo had left presumably to finish his schooling for the day and Fuyumi was waiting for her to return and care for the twins. I've got it, Fuyumi smiled, grabbing the dishes before her mother could and rushing into the kitchen. Fuyumi relaxed at the sight of her older brother carefully serving himself lunch. His arms were shaky, but when he caught her eye he smiled with his whole body. His eyes crinkled at the corners and his eyes shined with joy. His shoulders relaxed and his body seemed perked up. She almost dropped the plates in the sink as she stepped forward to hug him. She was almost at his height, but he still engulfed her in his embrace. Missed you, he mumbled, kissing her forehead. Missed you too, she closed her eyes and sighed. She rarely saw her older brother, due to father taking him away to train daily. The only times they got to see each other was in the brief moments they both had spare time, which rarely happened even once a month, or their father enforced a family meal which occurred only in their father's best or worst moods. Even though their father kept him isolated from the rest, she knew he was doing his best, that he was trying, and Tuya would become a wonderful hero because of it. Her brother pulled away, booping her nose with his index finger. She giggled in response, and they stood there in peaceful silence. He sobered after a few moments, and Fuyumi waited patiently for him to speak. He liked his lips. Any sign of Izuku's quirk? It was barely a whisper. She shook her head softly. Nothing yet, but me and Nat are keeping an eye on him when we can. And now Mama is too. He nodded but still looked uneasy. Fuyumi wished she could see what he was thinking and take away whatever was plaguing him. While she wasn't entirely sure why Tuya was against father finding out about Shudo's quirk, besides the obvious heartbreak that would be the separation of the twins, she trusted her older brother when he said that they must. You've got school work. His voice wavered slightly, an unknown fear spoken to the wind, but she was unable to interpret it. She hugged him again, feeling his lithe body pressed against hers and inhaling the scent of smoke. "See you later." He nodded at her retreat, but it didn't escape her that he did not say it back. Shudo was not having a good night. First off, Izuku had woken up in the middle of the night sick. He was crying and felt really hot, so Shudo tried to make some ice to cool him down, but he just threw up on the bed. His crying woke Fuyumi up, and she tried to calm him down with Shudo's help but eventually had to go get Mama. Mama looked really tired when she came into the room, but she didn't hesitate to pick Izuku up and take him for a bath. Shudo brought new pajamas for Izuku to change into, and Mama smiled nicely at him in return. He thought that Izuku would come back to sleep with him, but Mama said she was going to get Fuyumi to set up the guest bedroom for Izuku. Mama said she had to separate them because she didn't want Shudo to get sick as well, which was silly because his quirk helped keep him warm and cool by itself. There's no way he could get sick, but Mama wasn't having it. But besides that, Izuku's crying woke up Father, and he came out of his bedroom and yelled really loud, which scared Izuku more. Shudo tried to help by shushing Father, but he only became more angry and loud. Shudo was getting upset himself because there was only so much a 4-year-old could do. Fuyumi had to take him back to his room because everyone was upset and she didn't want him to add to the noise, which was okay, but that meant he have to leave Izuku. This then forced him to sleep alone, which he really didn't like because it's really dark by himself and there could be monsters in his closet. Everyone knew that the only way the monsters wouldn't get you if you were either a big kid or you had someone with you. And he didn't have Izuku with him. There were shadows moving across the walls and Shudo didn't want to be by himself anymore. An arm-shaped shadow was reaching towards him, and he yelped as he scrambled away from that part of the wall. He tumbled out of bed and wrapped a blanket around his shoulders to protect him from any attacks. What could he do against the monsters? What would a hero do? Well, he wasn't a hero, so he reasonably decided that he should act as a civilian and get as far away from the danger as he could. He slipped to the doorway and looked both ways. The hallway was empty, no monsters, siblings, or parents. Shudo wasted no time in locking the monster in his room, breathing harshly as his back leaned against his door. Now the only question was who he could go sleep with. Izuku was obviously out of the question, as was Mama, for obvious reasons. Natsuo liked to kick in his sleep and usually stole all the blankets, so he didn't want to join him. Fuyumi already tucked him back into bed and she always looks disappointed when she comes to wake her up because he used to go to her when Izuku has an accident, so he couldn't go to her. He briefly entertained the thought of joining his father but discarded the idea immediately. He was fairly certain Father did not like him on the best of days, and he was also a loud shouter, so if Shudo could avoid that he would. That meant the only option was Tuya. Tuya was really nice about letting Shudo and Izuku come sleep with him when they were scared. He always shared the blankets and wrapped his arms around them, making them feel super warm and super safe. They always woke up in their own bed in the morning, but Tuya was great at protecting them from the monsters. With his mind made up, his feet padded towards his older brother's room on the other side of the house. He made sure to tiptoe past Father's room so he didn't start yelling again. Shudo nearly tripped on his blanket, letting out a small hiss as he regained his footing and hesitantly made it the rest of the way. The shadows in the hallway seemed to be getting darker, and Shudo sprinted the rest of the way to Tuya's room. Once outside the door, Shudo debated knocking before realizing that it could wake Father up. He bit his lip and reached for the door handle. He slowly moved it open, revealing Tuya's room inside. His bed was on the floor, strangely enough, but besides that everything was spotless. Shudo rarely went into Tuya's room, but he was always surprised by how neat and tidy everything was. There was never anything left on the floor. His shelves with the big kid books on them were always straight, and the desk on one side of the room was almost completely spotless. His dirty clothes were all in a laundry hamper by the door and his closet was shut tight, which was good because it made it harder for the monsters to get out. That's also probably why he had his bed on the ground too, because then monsters couldn't live under there. Tuya's bed was in the corner of the room, and Shudo quietly made his way over. He didn't want to wake Tuya up because Father made him get up really early most days. Tuya deserved all the sleep in the world because he was one of the best big brothers ever. When he got to the bed, he saw Tuya sleeping peacefully, small and even breaths leaving his mouth. His hair was softly spread out on his pillow and the creases on his forehead were flattened out. His arms were bandaged all the way up, but Tuya promised they didn't hurt too bad. Shudo thought about what he should do. He didn't want to wake Tuya up, so he had to think about this carefully. He stepped onto the bed and sat down, scooting close to his older brother. He carefully lifted one of his arms and laid down before draping it back over his small body. He snuggled closer to the warmth he gave off, feeling Tuya relax and hold him a little closer. Tuya woke up to the sound of heavy footsteps approaching his door. "Father." His eyes snapped open and his heart started beating wildly. He tried to get up but was stopped by a heavy weight on his arm. Looking down, he noticed a head of red and white holding him down and his heart skipped a beat. There was a loud pounding on the door. "Tuya, get up already." His little brother flinched awake and Tuya quickly shushed him. "Minute." He turned to the door and called out, "Be there in a minute." Shudo gave Tuya the most pitiful glance in his half-asleep state. He petted his brother's hair as he extracted his arm from the vice grip it was held in. He tucked the blankets back around the younger boy and kissed his forehead, watching his eyelids flutter before he drifted back to sleep. Tuya then quickly rummaged through his closet to pull on some workout clothes. Just as he turned towards the door, his father threw it open, flames dancing across his face menacingly. Tuya was quick to step up beside him, praying he didn't notice the small lump in his bed. They were almost through the door when both of their eyes caught Shudo rolling over and snuggling deeper into Tuya's blankets. "What is the meaning of this?" Father hissed, his arm waving in the direction of his bed. Tuya forced a laugh as he rubbed the back of his neck. "Kid got nightmares. Let him sleep with me last night. Don't we have training? Don't push it. Don't push it." His father pushed it. Well, if he can't deal with nightmares on his own, how can he expect to make it in this world? You can't rely on anyone to help you because you'll end up hurt or dead. He's of the age to learn that lesson. Get him dressed and meet me in the training room in 5 minutes. Tuya watched blankly as his endeavor walked away. It wasn't until he rounded the corner that Tuya jumped into action. Father couldn't know about Shudo's quirk yet. Everyone had been tight-lipped about the whole ordeal, so he must just have the shittiest luck in the world. He had to think this through though. He couldn't go to training without Shudo because Endeavor would surely just come back for him, much less kindly than if Tuya got him ready. He had 5 minutes. That's all he thought as he walked briskly to his bed and slowly shook Shudo awake. 5 minutes to think. Figured. We gotta get up. Endeavor is meeting us in 5 minutes, so we gotta get dressed. Shudo blinked in confusion but was quick to his feet, recognizing the use of Endeavor instead of father. Tuya rummaged through drawers of his old workout clothes and found some that would fit Shudo. He knew Endeavor would not be providing breakfast, so he didn't hesitate to grab his emergency breakfast bars and opening one for Shudo. "Breakfast?" he supplied, already shoving his own down his throat. Thankfully, Shudo didn't complain and ate the food. Tuya ran a hand through his hair while the other grabbed Shudo's. Tuya slowed down so he wasn't dragging the younger boy behind him. He had to talk to Shudo before he got there. Had to give him something to get through this. Tuya abruptly stopped and got to his knees in front of Shudo, clasping his shoulders in his hands. "Shudo, listen to me. Endeavor is going to train us today. It's going to be very scary, but I'm going to protect you. He's going to focus mostly on me, but I need you to listen to what he says. Just, the one thing you absolutely cannot do is use your quirk. Understand? It might hurt and I am so sorry, but I need you to promise me this." Shudo nodded slowly, taking in the influx of words thrown at him. "Listen to Endeavor. Don't use my quirk." Tuya stuck out his pinky finger and Shudo wrapped his tiny one around it. Tuya brought it to his lips to kiss before Shudo reciprocated, cementing the promise between them. When they released, Tuya ruffled his brother's hair before scooping him into his arms and running the rest of the way. Endeavor looked unimpressed by their entrance, and Tuya quickly placed Shudo on the ground before standing rigidly straight. He would have laughed at Shudo's imitation of him if he wasn't so terrified. 4 minutes and 53 seconds. "You're lucky." Endeavor closed and locked the door behind them and moved to stand in the center of the room. "Shudo, watch your brother and stay out of the way. I'll be testing you next." Shudo nodded, remaining silent, and Endeavor glared down at him. "I need confirmation you understood, boy." Shudo flinched, tucking his chin to his chest. "Why this, sir?" Endeavor allowed Shudo to move 5 steps away from Tuya before attacking, and Tuya rolled away on instinct. He tried to contain Endeavor's hell flames to the opposite side of the room Shudo was on. It meant he was dealt a few more burns than on average, but Tuya would rather die than let anything happen to his little brother. He tried not to look at Shudo. He could hear whimpers and gasps coming from the small boy, but he thankfully didn't say a word. Tuya knew he looked like sheet with soot covering his hair and burns lining his arms, but he was positive seeing Shudo's face would break him. He went way past his limit, both physically and with his quirk. His body was screaming for him to stop. The muscles were burning and stretched, and all of his appendages were shaking. His arms begged to not be covered in flames anymore, the fire in his veins racing around his body in an attempt to escape the hell within. The scent of burnt flesh filled his nostrils from both of the quirks being used, but the thought of Shudo having to train once Tuya couldn't fight anymore forced him to keep going. One particularly brutal punch sent Tuya sprawling, and he coughed violently as he tried to catch his breath. He was on his knees, attempting to push himself up. Attempting to. Are you done, Tuya? Endeavor stood over him and aimed a light kick to his shoulder, forcing Tuya back to the ground. It was said mockingly, and frustrated tears leaked from his eyes. His arms wouldn't work. Why weren't they working? Endeavor turned his back, and Tuya saw fear in Shudo's eyes. Tuya raised his arm in his direction. A torrent of blue flames erupted from the appendage. Tuya heard screaming and registered a few seconds later that it was his own. Tuya's breath was ragged as he tried to contain the pain. Every breath felt like spikes were digging into his lungs, but his eyes never left Endeavor. Endeavor had been shielding Shudo from the blue flames, but now he was grinning proudly down at his son. A truly terrifying sight. "You used your quirk for offense." Tuya wanted to puke. He breathed deeply, watching the room spin around him. Endeavor came to his side and propped his into a sitting position, grimacing as he wiped the sweat from his son's face. "It's unfortunate you've exhausted yourself, but I'm sure seeing his brother use his quirk will inspire Shudo to use his own." Tuya lunged forward with his remaining strength. Endeavor simply took 2 steps back and left Tuya on the ground. "I'll leave him dash. You're exhausted, Tuya. Take a break while I work with your brother." Endeavor dismissed him and stood in front of Shudo's trembling body. "Now, Shudo. You're 4 years old. That means your quirk should be coming in soon. Let's see if we can speed that up." Ftesh. Tuya tried to push himself to his feet but simply collapsed under his weight. Endeavor had walked over to a supply closet to pull something out, and Tuya couldn't breathe. He had to do something. Anything. He had to. Shudo was staring at him intensely. His eyes were blurry, but Tuya could physically feel the aura his little brother was giving off. Tuya couldn't decipher what he was trying to say with that gaze until Shudo shakily lifted his pinky finger. Tuya bit back a sob. What a useless older brother he was. A 4-year couldn't possibly outsmart an adult hero. Endeavor was going to find out and force Shudo to train. Tuya could admit what this really was. Endeavor, NG, their father, was going to abuse Shudo once he discovered his quirk, and Tuya was helpless to stop it. Shudo set his determined gaze on his father, and Tuya winced at the similarities in their expressions. Just as Endeavor was setting up some sort of contraption in front of Shudo, 3 loud bangs echoed from the door. "Yenji. Shudo is missing." It was Ray. Enjit sked as he stood and went to unlock the door. He stared down at his wife, who had bloodshot eyes. "He's training," he stated bluntly. Enji had never seen someone go from frightened to enraged in such a short period of time. She pushed past him without a word, and he stumbled in shock. He watched mutely as his wife kneeled down to pick Shudo off the ground, hugging him tightly to her chest as she moved onto Tuya. Enji felt his own rage build inside him as he stomped over to the trio on the floor. "What do you think you are doing, woman?" Ray left Shudo with his brother and stood up, glared at him with the intensity of 1,000 suns, and slapped him. It was silent in the training room. Ray had hit him with enough force to knock his head to the left, and he forced himself to slowly turn back and face her. He was significantly taller than her, but she was not cowed by his presence as she used to. Shuto is 4 years old and without a quirk. Rei's face was calm, but her voice was sharp. Tuya is barely a teenager and he is lying on the ground after being thrown around by a grown, adult man. I won't let you hurt them anymore. This isn't training. This is abuse. Enji stared harshly at his wife, but she did not blink. What did this woman know about being a hero? The only way to get stronger, to be the best, was to go beyond your limits and push until you break. She knew nothing of strength. He provided everything for her and she has yet to deliver the perfect weapon he so desired. She was sold to him. She belonged to him. How dare she raise a hand to him as if she was stronger than him? He raised his fist in response. Shuto would remember this beating for the rest of his life. Shuto didn't talk for an entire week. Natsuo told him that was 7 days, then helped him count it out on his fingers. They did it together 7 times just to be sure, and Natsuo ruffled his hair when Izuku got through the numbers all by himself. Shuto wanted to be beside Izuku all the time now. Not that Izuku minded all that much. His twin didn't have a very loud presence. He was one of the only people who didn't make him want to cry and scratch his ears and scream because there was something wrong. But now Shuto wasn't loud at all, because he hasn't talked for 7 whole days, and that was a whole new kind of wrong. Izuku and his siblings tried a lot of things. Izuku knew whenever he wasn't feeling very good he liked having Shuto lay on top of him because it made him feel more here and together. He tried that a lot, and Shuto occasionally gave him a small smile but never a sound. Except for a few oofs the first few times Izuku laid on him without warning. Natsuo took them outside a lot. He told Izuku that a lot of sunshine was supposed to be good for you like plants, so it should also help Shuto. He brought out the soccer ball for the first few visits, but then they just walked around the backyard as he told them everything he knew about the plants they passed. They tried to play a few games when they could. However, Shuto didn't want to play with them and opted to just sit out, even though Izuku tried many times to get him to join or, when that proved useless, he sat beside him so he wasn't lonely. Fuyumi read a lot to them. She'd sit between them and drape the big fluffy blanket from the living room over all of them. She would read some of the few kid books in the house with silly voices, often prompting Natsuo to join in. Izuku really enjoyed this time. There was a bubbly feeling in his chest as Fuyumi read and he constantly looked to Shuto if he was enjoying this as much as he was, but there was only tension in his twin's shoulders as he occasionally glanced at the door. It made the bubbly feeling go away and Izuku was angry that Shuto was feeling this way but wouldn't tell Izuku why. He wished father didn't take Tuya away from them all the time, because Tuya always explained the things that didn't make sense to Izuku. None of his siblings had seen Tuya since Shuto had come back quiet, and Izuku didn't understand what was happening. Izuku also didn't understand why Mama wasn't helping. She was also very quiet now, but she still occasionally spoke. One difference Izuku noticed was she now had a big bruise on her cheek, but she didn't tell him why when he asked. She looked smaller, somehow, and paler. Her smile wasn't as strong as it used to be, and while she still petted Izuku's hair and picked him up, she didn't do the same for Shuto anymore. Whenever Shuto was in the same room as her, she would quickly leave, which confused Izuku even more. Was Shuto being punished and that was why Shuto wasn't talking? Was he not allowed to talk anymore? Well, if that were the case, Izuku wasn't going to talk either. Well, it's lunchtime. Fuyumi closes the book and smiled at the trio of Todoroki children sitting in front of her. Silently, they all stood to walk to the kitchen to get something to eat. Fuyumi walked behind them, trying to forget how one look from their mother had her swiftly leaving the room. Natsuo had led the twins to the refrigerator, giving out different options for lunch that were either already prepared or he knew Fuyumi could make quickly. Fuyumi knew that Shuto wouldn't be giving a response, but she was surprised to not hear anything from Izuku either. Natsuo's brows furrowed in confusion. Zuku? Anything I said sound good? Izuku resolutely stared at the ground, ignoring his question. Fuyumi and Natsuo shared a concerned look. They had become accustomed to hearing more of Izuku's voice this past week, and to suddenly be greeted with silence was frightening. Fuyumi watched a flicker of emotion enter Shuto's eyes as he stared at his twin, the silence permeating the air. A few more seconds passed and Shuto decisively dragged him to the fridge. Without a word exchanged, the two young boys made various gestures before finally settling on a decision. Shudo grabbed a dish from the fridge and gave it to Fuyumi, a questioning look on his eyes. She nodded and smiled, elated to see Shudo engaging with her, and took the food to begin preparing lunch. The twins went to the opposite side of the kitchen to sit on the floor. Their hands were clasped tightly in the other's hand, and Izuku laid his head on Shudo's shoulder, eyes closed. Tension that no almost 5-year-old should have fled Shudo's shoulders at the contact and let his own head rest against his twins. Natsuo came to Fuyumi's side to offer assistance, and they worked in tandem to make their meal. They worked seamlessly together, weaving around one another without saying a word and passing objects the other needed before a question could even be formed. Fuyumi worked with the knife while Natsuo manned the stove top, ensuring the food would not burn or stick to the bottom. Natsuo handed the twins their plates while Fuyumi was serving another 2 portions. The boys took them wordlessly and exited to the dining room to eat. Natsuo thanked his sister before joining them, a troubled expression on his usually gleeful face. Fuyumi hung back, resting against the counter and fighting the urge to scream. At some point her fingers had dug into her scalp and she swallowed painfully as tears stung her eyes. She knew something had happened with Mama, Shudo, Tuya, and probably Father, but none of them had told the other 3 Todorokis anything. And it was fine. They would come to the others when they were ready. But Fuyumi couldn't forget the hurt in her heart when she didn't hear Izuku answer. She knew Izuku looked to Shudo in almost any situation as if he didn't know what the right answer was, even if there wasn't a right answer to be had. She was optimistic this past week because Izuku seemed to finally be branching off to have his own opinion, even though something awful had happened to Shudo, but now he has regressed so far back. She selfishly wished Tuya was here. He could handle the twins better than even Mama, but Father had him training day and night. She scrubbed her eyes with the heel of her hand, praying that her eyes were not red. She forced a smile and grabbed a plate and headed into the dining room. It was the 8th day when Shudo finally spoke. Endeavor was called out on a mission, so he had finally left the house. Rei was holed up in her room, and Tuya debated inviting her to dinner when he passed the bedroom. The door was opened slightly, and when he peered in she was sobbing as she threw some of Endeavor's personal belongings around the room. He felt it was best to leave his mother for now. His whole body was pounding from the pain of the last week. It was non-stop training, both physically and for his quirk. He was fairly certain he destroyed some of the nerves in his arms from prolonged use, as well as a few broken fingers to accompany his agony. He was also sure that some of his ribs were cracked if not broken, and his right ankle was swollen. The hair above his right ear was non-existent, and it itched insanely bad. He was dead on his feet, moments away from collapse, but any time he closed his eyes he saw Shudo's tear-stained cheeks as Tuya used his body to cover him and take the blows from Endeavor. He could picture his mother curled against the wall, the light slowly leaving her eyes as she watched her husband land blow after blow on her oldest son. Endeavor aimed his flames at Shudo, and Tuya didn't hesitate to shield Shudo with his body. Tuya didn't let him lay a single hit on his brother, and he would do it again in a heartbeat. He could hear his siblings chattering quietly to themselves. Well, it was louder than usual, considering the whole household was aware of Endeavor's departure. However, he was confused. Why could he only hear 2 voices? He entered the dining room without a sound. He stood against the wall for a few minutes, a smile tugging his lips as he watched Fuyumi serve their younger brothers. Natsuo happily talked about the latest soccer game the national team played. The air was heavy, but his siblings were smiling. It was weird not hearing Izuku's voice chime in every once in a while with questions or Shudo trying to change the subject to heroes. Oh! Fuyumi startled at the sight of him. The rest of his siblings tensed before peeking up at the sight of their older brother. Tuya tried to smile but was fairly certain it more resembled a grimace. "Hey kids." His voice was soft, more subdued. Shudo watched with wide eyes as he sat beside him and gingerly ruffled his hair. Izuku was looking between his twin and Tuya, rocking in his seat. It was a clear indication that the youngest Todoroki wanted to ask a question, but something kept him from asking it. "You have a question, Zuku?" Izuku shook his head and kept his eyes down. His fingers tugged at his shirt and he brought his knees to his chest. Tuya looked to Fuyumi for an explanation only to receive a sad look in Shudo's direction. Tuya understood instantly. Hey Sho. He turned his full attention to his little brother, meeting his eyes head-on. He looked smaller than the last time he saw him, but that was probably because he was hunching his shoulders. What's wrong? Shudo shook his head and stared at his lap. He then looked to Tuya, his expression blank as he spoke in a crackly voice. I didn't use my quirk. Fuyumi and Natsuo both jumped at the sound. Izuku was insistently tugging on Shudo's sleeve and Tuya laughed even though there were tears running down his cheeks. He pulled the young boy carefully into his lap and hugged him tightly. Yeah, you didn't. You're the bravest kid I know. Shudo sobbed into his shoulder, instantly drenching the fabric in tears, and Tuya held him a little closer. Enji knew his family was lying to him. He was a seasoned pro hero, known for his efficient takedown of villains. He was intelligent and strong, able to wield his quirk and strengths to his whim to accomplish any task. He was number 2 in the ratings and had his fair share of experiencing numerous quirks in his lifetime. He was the flame hero, Endeavor. He knew one of his youngest kids had to have manifested his perfect masterpiece. The brats were almost 5, but he had barely seen them as the rest of his family swept the children out of the room as he entered. If this was the case, it was only a matter of time before he could start training his proper successor. He had a few problems though. One was figuring out which one of the brats was his masterpiece. Shudo had half of his looks from Rei and the other half from Enji, which could symbolize a balance of the 2 quirks they each had. Izuku, on the other hand, was perfectly blended, which could also represent both a fire and ice quirk. Neither one of them could be hiding a quirk. They could be hiding the quirk. The second was getting one of the twins alone to personally test what quirks they had. He tried with Shudo. He had a system all set up that would have perfectly evaluated what Shudo had to offer him, but Rei and Tuya quickly intervened. He was sure a few minutes of training would determine who his perfect masterpiece was, or if both of them were potential successors. The third was setting up an appointment with a quirk counselor. Tuya was taking up most of his spare time with training, as pitiful as the results were, and he couldn't allow Rei to take his creations by herself. That would mean depending on her not to lie to him, which he was well aware would be impossible. Nonetheless, Enji's patience was wearing thin, both with the twins and with Tuya. You can't seriously be done already, Tuya? His son was wheezing on the floor, displaying his weakness for all to see. His red head was sticking to his forehead from sweat, and he could smell the faint scent of burnt skin. Enji reaches down and grabbed the collar of Tuya's shirt and yanked him to his feet. He stared at the boy, who resolutely made eye contact with him, though one hand was gripping his side. He couldn't believe his genes had produced this. While Tuya was able to produce a brilliant blue flame, able to incinerate metals in the blink of an eye that Enji never could, the boy got his mother's weakness. His skin was littered with burns from his past failures. He didn't know how to get through the boy's thick skull that being the best meant pushing through the pain to reach your peak. I've decided I'll be giving you one final chance to prove yourself. He let go of his son, watching his knees shake as he tried to hold his weight. One last chance to prove he is capable of becoming the hero Enji trained him to be. I'm taking you out on the field. I was assigned to capture Glitch. He's been terrorizing the area 15 minutes west out of Mizudafu. You are to do exactly as I say, or there will be consequences. Be ready to leave in 5 minutes. Tuya said nothing, and Enji nodded in approval before marching him out the door. Tuya bit his lip, trying to contain any noise that might escape him. His side was throbbing in pain. His legs were jelly and his arms were completely numb. His quirk was not fighting to leave him as it usually did, which was a small mercy at the moment. His breath caught in his throat when he turned a corner and ran into his younger brother. Natsuo was grinning at him, eyes sparkling. Tuya, this weekend I was wondering if you, Fuyumi and Dash. His voice caught off as Endeavor rounded the corner. He's busy. He pushed Natsuo to the side and strutted past him without a second thought. Tuya offered an apologetic smile to his brother before he was forced out of the house. He would make sure to pull Natsuo aside when he came home. They stopped at Endeavor's agency to be debriefed and for Endeavor to grab his essentials before heading out. They walked through the front doors with ease. Everyone knew that standing outside of the agency, whether you were an adoring fan or the press, would not bode well for you. When the two Todorokis passed the front desk, it didn't go unnoticed that the people they passed either shrunk into themselves or tried to stand a little taller. None of them even glanced at Tuya. Endeavor suited them both up and grabbed some Quirk-canceling cuffs. Of course, he did not offer them to Tuya. While it was certainly illegal to be dragging his eldest son onto the battlefield without express permission from the Hero Public Safety Commission, the number 2 hero didn't allow such things to stop him. It was a quick in-and-out kind of affair. Glitch, a rising villain east is the city, had increased sightings and also an increase of kidnappings. He used his quirk to physically glitch as a means of teleporting. He was able to take anything he was touching with him, and used his quirk to avoid physical attacks by glitching before a hit could land. He was not an offensive fighter but could hold his own against several of the lower pro heroes. His name was Deguchi Anu and he was estimated to be in his late 20s, and Endeavor was finally assigned the case after his 38th kidnapping. While Glitch was not in the media, most of his victims were. There were only 2 outcomes of those who were taken by the villain. They were either found dead a week after capture or they were never seen again. The duo arrived at their destination, one standing tall with arrogant confidence and the other hiding their trembles. Endeavor had received intel that Glitch would be striking his next victim after midnight on a teenager with a quirk that allowed him to manipulate water molecules. Tuya wondered what their name was, but Endeavor snapped that it wasn't important. Now that they were standing here, in a dirty alley, Tuya grew worried. Endeavor had not shared his plan to apprehend the villain, nor did he answer any of Tuya's questions. Looking back now, Tuya never should have let him drag him here. When Glitch appeared, Endeavor quickly leaped into action, his fist ablaze. The first hit landed solidly on the villain, who hissed in pain but quickly glitched 15 meters away. Tuya immediately fell into a defensive stance, assuming he would be Endeavor's backup/sidekick in this fight. He watched Endeavor's hell flames flare up whenever he missed a hit, synchronizing with the high-pitched laughter that came from Glitch as he evaded another attack. Glitch seemed to dance with his movements, only Endeavor's quirk and the moonlight illuminating his steps. Endeavor became more frustrated by the second, his hell flames growing stronger and his words harsher. While Tuya found it humorous that the villain was giving the pro here the runaround, he still prayed this would be over soon so he could go home. Glitch teleported over top of Endeavor and landed a well-aimed kick to the pro hero's face. Endeavor growled as he shot fire in the direction Glitch has jumped off to, only managing to paint the alley in brilliant reds, yellows, and oranges. Tuya watched, entranced as the villain moved from the pro hero's grasp with an ease Tuya would never be able to. It all came to an end when Glitch met Tuya's eyes with a mischievous wink and was suddenly behind the teen. A knife was held against his neck and Tuya remembered, oh yeah, this is a villain we are supposed to be capturing. Endeavor glared at the villain with murderous intent, but made no move to help his son. Big bad Endeavy. Glitch crooned while pushing the blade against Tuya's back until a trickle of blood spilled out. It appears we are at an impasse. Endeavor grunted, the light of his beard flickering in his agitated eyes. Tuya's waiting for him to say something, to do something, to get him away from the villain. There was no obvious movements and Tuya strained his eyes to see if he was supposed to be getting some kind of signal. Did Endeavor even have a plan? Not quite, Endeavor grinned and Tuya's heart dropped to his stomach. That smile was not a comforting one. Aiden Tuya knew he wouldn't like the next words that would leave Endeavor's mouth. Tuya, the time has come to prove yourself. He couldn't be serious. Tuya could feel the rumbling of laughter in Glitch's chest, the life pressing dangerous into his throat once more. Oh, the all-powerful flame hero is leaving me to his son? What a laugh. This kid is harmless. Endeavor ignored his taunts and focused his gaze on Tuya. Either use your quirk to get free or I'm leaving you behind. Glitch shifted his hold, choking Tuya with one hand while raising his knife in the other. Tuya saw the glint of the blade in his peripheral and felt panic bubble up in his chest. In the blink of an eye, the knife plunged into his stomach and Tuya reacted on instinct. Blue flames engulfed the pair. Shrieks could be heard for a second before cutting out. Endeavor watched on, seemingly unimpressed by the ashes surrounding his son. Enji stepped forward and looked down upon Tuya. He was disgusted by how weak his body was, but there was also a twinge or something else in his heart. The flames had consumed him, the skin a deep purple in color and melting off Tuya's body. He knelt down to inspect his son farther, turning him onto his back and watched as Tuya choked on blood and ash. This was from his blood? He had trained Tuya to be strong, to be a fighter. He trained his on to be a greater hero than All Might, had worked this boy to break his limits and champion the Endeavor legacy, and he was taken out by a single attack? Pathetic, Enji snarled, rising to his feet once more. What worth are you to me if you destroy yourself in the face of a villain? He turned to walk out of the alley. He could hear a slight movement behind him and without turning around, spoke to that thing on the ground. You disappoint me. Do not bother returning home if you survive. The system will lock you out. It will recognize you for what you are, and you will not be welcomed in. He walked out of the alley, hearing a faint thump as he turned to corner. Natsuo was bouncing in his seat nervously, waiting for Tuya to return home. The rest of the Todorokis have long gone to bed, but Natsuo needed to wait up for his older brother. He had to ask him about his birthday next week. Mama avoided the children as often as she could, especially if Shudo was around. Fuyumi tried to fill the gap left behind by cooking their meals and helping with homework and reading them stories, but it just wasn't the same. At least Tuya was there. He made everything feel good and normal. He played soccer with Natsuo when he asked and braided Fuyumi's hair into elaborate hairdos and knew how to deal with Izuku's meltdowns and talked about heroes with Shudo. He was the best older brother ever, and he really needs Tuya to agree to take them all to soccer tournament that was happening at one of the local high schools for his birthday. He tried asking Mama, but she said she didn't feel well enough to go out. She told him to ask Tuya, because he was old enough to basically be an adult and could take him. So it was really important Tuya came home soon. Natsuo was on his feet as soon as he heard the front door click. He skidded around the corner, eager to ask Tuya his super-duper important question, only to be faced with a lone Endeavor. Father stared tiredly down at him, unmoving. Natsuo craned his neck to see around him. Tuya was just behind him, right? No way Father would come home without Tuya. But his older brother did not appear and Father did not move away from the door. Where's Tuya? He whispered. Tuya was fine, right? He was the strongest person Natsuo knew. Of course he had to be okay. Tuya didn't let anything keep him down for long. Listen, Natsuo. Father placed a heavy hand on his shoulder and Natsuo tensed. He was sure this was the first time Father had ever touched or spoken directly to him since his quirk came in. There was an accident with a villain. Tuya. He's in the hospital, right? Can I go see him? Natsuo would never dream of interrupting his father, but this was Tuya they were talking about. He had to make sure he was okay. Father, surprisingly, did not seem angry to be interrupted. No. Tuya. He didn't make it. Natsuo's world stopped completely. There was a ringing in his ears and the hand on his shoulder felt incredibly heavy. No. Tuya isn't, but he was supposed to. He can't be. He couldn't complete that sentence. I'm sorry. Natsuo couldn't believe it. Tuya couldn't be gone. He just couldn't. His birthday was coming up and Tuya was going to take him to see the tournament. And he hasn't seen Izuku's quirk yet or went to high school or had a girlfriend. Tuya was just a kid. His cheeks were wet when he raised a hand to touch them. He stared at the floor silently for a few moments before anger overtook him. It's your fault. You took Tuya out there and you didn't protect him. You're a hero and now Tuya's. He's. Natsuo did something else he promised Tuya he would never do. He punched his fatto. He punched Endeavor in the chest. Granted, Natsuo was still young, so his hit did not leave any impact, but Endeavor made no move to block it. He let Natsuo scream and cry, hitting his chest repeatedly. The noise woke up the rest of the Todorokis. Fuyumi rushed down the stairs and quickly pulled Natsuo away. Izuku held tightly onto Shudo's shirt as he stood behind him, letting the older twin face their screaming older brother as Fuyumi held him back and looked overwhelmed. Rei appeared quietly, a robe tied around her waist. She took one look at Endeavor and asked a single question. "Where is Tuya?" Silence. The Todorokis stood there, together. Natsuo stopped crying, glaring vehemently at the man in front of them, almost daring him to repeat what he said. He took a breath. There was an accident. And Ray let out a heart-wrenching sob. The anger was simmering in his chest, curling around his heart and slowly squeezing. The soccer ball bouncing off of his foot kept it contained, but Natsuo knew as soon as he dropped it all hell would break loose. Foot, knee, foot, knee. The ball hit the ground. Natsuo stared at it uncomprehending, his fists clenched. He breathed out his nose and slowly released his grip, eyeing the crescent indents in his palms. Fuyumi was in her room. She hadn't left the room for 2 days now and didn't respond to Natsuo's knocking. He tried to open the door yesterday, but it was firmly locked in place. Mom was still in her room, but now she didn't come out to cook meals or do anything besides sitting in bed and sobbing. Natsuo couldn't bear going closer to her door when he had to pass it that morning. Shuto and Izuku were with him all the time. They were never far from each other's grasp, nor were they ever far from Natsuo. If Natsuo left the room, his younger brothers were quick to follow. Even at night they asked if they could sleep with him, and he would have Shuto snuggled in his left side towards the door and Izuku on the right against the wall. The only break he got from them was when he went to the bathroom, though they would simply wait outside the door for him to be finished. Endeavor hadn't been back to the house since he told them about Tuya. That night, after watching Mom collapse and Fuyumi turn white as a ghost, he had left as quickly as he arrived, not sparing his family a second glance. There had been no phone calls home, just the news playing various segments of the numerous arrests Endeavor had made the past few days. Pro-hero Endeavor diligently working to keep our city safe. Will this mean a rise in the ranks for our fiery hero? Endeavor has picked up the slack of a few pro-heroes these past few days. Truly a hero the people should admire. There's been a distinctive drop in crime rate these past few days since pro-hero Endeavor has taken it upon himself to clean the city from these villains. Endeavor had never talked about his family to the press. Sure, the world was aware he had a wife and some kids, but their identities and numbers were left as blanks. That being said, no one was aware of Tuya's passing. It was wrong. It was infuriating. Natsuo and I. Natsuo slowly released the tension in his shoulders before turning to his younger brothers. It was Shuto who had spoken, looking as solemn as an almost 5-year-old could. Izuku was standing slightly behind him on his right side, his little fingers curled into his brother's shirt. "What's up, Shuto?" He needed to be calm. He needed to be calm for. Mom wasn't helping and neither was Fuyumi. As angry as Natsuo was, his little brothers were still practically babies and they needed someone now. More than ever, considering the circumstances. Shuto shifted back and forth, eyes locked on the ground and mumbled something under his breath. Natsuo smiled softly and knelt to his brother's level. "You gotta speak up so I can hear you, kid." Tuya used to call them that all the time. Shuto hesitantly met Natsuo's gaze. It's your birthday, right? And Tuya and Fuyumi were espacied to take you to soccer." Shuto's voice trailed off. "We take you." Izuku spoke up, nodding firmly at Natsuo like it was already decided. Natsuo blinked at his siblings, a warm feeling entering his chest to replace some of the anger. There was still the bitterness that Tuya and Fuyumi had promised to take him, but now Tuya was gone and no one had seen Fuyumi the past couple of days. But here was Shuto and Izuku, gazing up at Natsuo with such pure love and determination that he felt his shoulders relax even further. Whatever this feeling was, he hoped Natsuo was able to give it to Tuya a bajillion times over. But now came the implication of their words. Mom had told him he needed to take an adult with him or Tuya to go watch the soccer games. He would be the oldest at a ripe age of 10. He would need to take care of his little brothers if they went out and watch out for them to make sure they didn't stray too far away. However, Mom and Fuyumi hadn't left their rooms in days, and Endeavor had been gone for the same time. What was stopping Natsuo from taking his little brothers out of the house for a while? Natsuo hugged his brothers and grinned broadly. "I guess we have a game to catch." It was loud. That was Izuku's first observation once they had left the house and began walking. His hand was firmly in Natsuo's grasp as he led them to the soccer game, and Izuku made sure he was walking fast enough to keep up. Shudo was talking a mile a minute about a new pro hero debuting at their own radio show. Izuku thought it was nice that pro heroes could do more than just save lives. It probably made them happy, being able to do things they liked rather than working all the time like Father. Maybe if Father had another job he would be happier? It was surely something to think about. It was loud outside, and although a part of Izuku wanted to curl up with his favorite blanket at home and cry, he also wanted to see everything they passed. There were a lot of colors surrounding them and so many things he had never seen before. Father had never allowed his children to walk anywhere, and it was a treat to see all of the buildings up close without a tinted window blurring the sights. Izuku tended to start walking off when something caught his eye, but Natsuo was quick to gently pull him back to his side. Izuku huffed every time, but understood they were doing this for Natsuo, so he couldn't be too picky. But nobody said they couldn't look at the things Izuku wanted to on the way back. The walk was a lot shorter than the pink-haired boy thought, and soon enough Natsuo was holding open a heavy metal door for Shudo and Izuku to walk through. There was a lot of glass in the walls that, instead of letting them see outside, showed them twisted pieces of metal with different labels Izuku struggled to comprehend. Shudo made up his own words to the symbols shown to them, eliciting cheerful laughter from the smaller boy at the silly titles he gave them. Natsuo asked for directions from an elderly woman who pinched Shudo's cheeks and commented on how responsible you are, young man, before slowly guiding them to the stands. Natsuo got them good seats. Or rather, he seemed happy about where they were sitting, and Izuku assumed that meant the same thing. Izuku pulled himself into a chair and Shudo was quick to sit beside him. Natsuo sat beside Shudo and they patiently waited for the game to begin. Shudo didn't really understand what was happening, but Natsuo was yelling and cheering with a huge grin on his face, making it easy for a smile to appear on Shudo as well. The players were kicking a ball down a field and trying to score at the huge nets. It was like the game they played with Tuya and Fuyumi, only with more people, a bigger field, and nets instead of shoes. It was exciting when someone scored, but it didn't happen all too often. He also wasn't sure which team they were cheering for, as Natsuo was cheering for one team when they had the ball but then would switch to the other after the other team had the ball. It was confusing, but the high energy had Shudo bouncing in his seat and cheering alongside his older brother. After a person in the net caught the ball, Shudo looked over at Izuku to see what he thought of the game. Izuku was kicking his feet back and forth like the clock in their living room, his head shifting from one side to the other. Shudo knew what that meant. Natsuo and I. Shudo shouted over the cheering but was overpowered by the crowd. He tugged on his older brother's sleeve to get his attention. Natsuo and I. Izuku needs to go potty. Natsuo looked down at his younger brothers and back at the game with a sigh. His eyes looked a bit sad and his shoulders slumped down. A few seconds later, Natsuo shook his head and rose to his feet. He held out a hand for each brother to take and led them through the stands and to a bathroom. Shudo followed Izuku into a stall while Natsuo waited outside for them. When they didn't appear a few minutes later, Natsuo began to grow impatient. He was missing the game. Did they really have to go when there were only a few minutes left? Natsuo bit his lip, hearing a roar from the crowd. What did he miss? Did someone score? Was there an epic save? An irrational wave of frustration crashed over him, but he tried to shove it down. His brothers were little and needed to go to the bathroom when they said so. He should just be thankful Shudo brought Izuku's condition to his attention before an accident occurred. Another round of cheers echoed from the field and Natsuo tapped his foot anxiously. He knocked on the bathroom stall his brothers were in. Need any help? No, was Shudo's cheerful reply, and all Natsuo could do was wait. Once he heard the toilet flush, he ushered his brothers to wash their hands and quickly dragged them back to the stands. Natsuo sighed in relief as he realized there was still 1 minute left of designated play time and sank into his seat. The brothers stayed for the finals, where the winning goal was secured when one player dribbled beautifully around 3 players before faking the shot and passing it to his teammate, who had an open net to score. Natsuo jumped to his feet with the crowd, adrenaline pumping through his veins. While this was a high school match, it was still exhilarating to watch. And now came the best part Natsuo was waiting for. The stands filed out steadily, a few stragglers staying behind to discuss some of the highlights of the game. Natsuo led his brothers to the field, weaving around various adults. The weight of 3 slips of paper securely tucked into his pocket made more prominent as they reached their destination. He approached a tall blonde man with his hair tied back and a clipboard in hand. He had a fancy-looking suit on and was marking down something on his papers. He saw the boys approaching and gave a kind smile. "Hey there, kiddos. Are you lost?" "Nope." Natsuo dropped his little brother's hands and dug into his pocket to pull out the 3 slips of paper. "I have these." The papers were passes to meet with the high school's soccer team after the tournament. Natsuo had won them in an online contest that was advertising the home team's tournament. Natsuo was ecstatic when he was announced the winner and couldn't wait to bring Tuya with him to meet some real-life soccer players. He pushed the hatred towards Endeavor down as the man grabbed the papers, his eyes lighting up. "Oh, so you're the lucky winners. My name's Suzuki Kaito and I'm the manager of this team. I'm sure the boys would love to meet some little fans." Natsuo grinned excitedly and followed Suzuki to the field where the team was finishing up taking photos with their first-place medals. They were all big and some even had facial hair. Natsuo was entranced by how strong they looked and hoped he would one day be able to play on a team like them. A whistle pierced the air, making Izuku squeal and the other 2 wince. Natsuo allowed Izuku to squish up against him and hide in his jacket when the group of soccer players ran up to meet them. The coach had them stand in a line and Natsuo couldn't contain his grin. Each player introduced themselves to the boys and their position. They were confident in their introductions and Natsuo loved every second of it. When he was asked to introduce himself, he felt a flutter of anxiety in his chest but pushed through it. "I'm Natsuo. And these are my little brothers Shuto and Izuku. I want to play soccer like you guys when I'm older." There was hearty laughter at his response, and one of the players ruffled the 10-year-old's hair. There were also a few glances at the lack of a surname, but Natsuo wasn't stupid. Even a hint of the name Todoroki would send anyone into a whirlwind of questions that he was not prepared to answer. The players answered all of Natsuo's questions about their experiences and what it was like playing on a team. They shared tips with him and their own training regimens that he could implement at home. They showed him a few practice drills themselves and Natsuo couldn't wait to try out at home. Shuto had even drifted a bit from his older brother to talk to his own group of soccer players. He was animatedly talking to them about what he saw in the game, executing a poor but enthusiastic rendition of some of their plays. Izuku stayed firmly planted in Natsuo's jacket, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes, but he appeared relatively calm, so a meltdown was unlikely to occur. The 3 boys stayed with the team for half an hour before bidding farewell and beginning the long trek home. Izuku had whined before they had left the school and Natsuo wasn't prepared to deal with a meltdown. The smaller boy was now riding on Natsuo's back and Shuto was dragging his feet beside his older brother, evidently exhausted from the day's events. Either way, soft smiles graced their cheeks and the trio enjoyed the silence on their way home. Natsuo expected there to be backlash when he arrived home. Maybe Endeavor finally decided to come back and was going to yell at them. Maybe Mom had left her room and was hysteric at having lost 3 of her children. Maybe Fuyumi would be frantically calling the police to find her younger brothers and hug them tightly when they entered the door before scolding them about leaving the property without an adult. None of that happened. Natsuo surveyed the first few rooms for the older members of their family, listening intently for any movement in the house. There was nothing to hear, and Endeavor's shoes weren't even at the front door. Natsuo didn't know how to feel about that. He was partly relieved at not receiving punishment, but there was also resentment for no one noticing that the 3 youngest Todorokis were gone. He let these emotions soar through his veins briefly before suppressing them. Even thought he was angry at everyone for not taking care of them like they were supposed to. At least he could take care of the younger Todorokis. He sighed, sliding Izuku off his back before giving a weary smile. "What do you guys want for supper?" "Natsuo, come here," said boy sighed and followed the sound of Endeavor's bellows to Tuya's room. No one had been in his room since Endeavor took Tuya with him and didn't return. It had been a week and Natsuo's stomach twisted at the thought of entering, but he also didn't want Endeavor messing with his older brother's stuff. The room was tidy, like Natsuo expected. Tuya always liked to keep things clean because he claimed it brought less trouble. Prior to his death, Natsuo assumed Tuya said it as something he heard from their mother, a piece of advice that was meant more to make a child listen than actual wisdom. Knowing Endeavor, there was probably a lot more meaning in his words. Endeavor's fiery beard flickered in the dark room. He had neglected to turn the lights on with no apparent reason for not doing so. Natsuo did it to spite him. Endeavor gazed at him coolly and Natsuo met his stare. Endeavor gestures grandly with his arm at the room. This room needs to be organized and cleaned. I don't have time to do it, so I'm leaving this job to you. Throw out whatever is unnecessary. Natsuo was going to retort with a biting remake, maybe something about how Endeavor would be the first unnecessary item to be thrown out, but the man had left the room before he could. Natsuo huffed but got to work anyway. At least if it was him, nothing would go to waste. Anything that was Tuya's would be staying and Endeavor would never get the opportunity to destroy it. Natsuo closed the door, leaning against it and closing his eyes. He could already feel his energy draining and he hadn't even started yet. Nonetheless, he slapped his cheeks and headed over to Tuya's desk. He opened the top desk and came face to face with a dark blue notebook. There was no title on the book and because of that Natsuo thought it might be empty. He flipped through it quickly to check but saw it filled with writing. It looked like a school notebook and he was going to place it in a discard pile before reconsidering. It was alone, the only book in that drawer, which was weird if it were a school book. Well, even if it was, there might be personal doodles or something in there that Natsuo could keep with him. He opened the first page to look, feeling a pang in his heart as he saw his older brother's writing. It was sharp and precise, exactly as he remembered it. He read the title on first line and froze. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and read it again to see if the words had changed. They hadn't. He flipped through a few more pages, each containing more and more information and each making his heart burn a little more. It was a collection of Endeavor's abuse and Tuya's plans for a future without him. Izuku liked mornings. The rest of his family tended to dislike mornings because they were generally tired and grouchy before having their coffee. Fuyumi generally had a pinched look on her face as she stumbled towards the coffee maker. Natsuo wasn't even up unless someone went and got him. Mama was never seen early in the mornings unless there was something happening that day that she absolutely had to be up. Even Shudo struggled with getting out of bed, often relying on his twin to drag him to the kitchen for breakfast. But Izuku liked mornings because the routine rarely changed. He woke up beside his brother and laid there for a few minutes before it was time to wake up. Then he would wake Shudo up by lying on top of him and poking his cheek, counting to 7 before repeating. Shudo would complain and pull the blankets over his head, but eventually they would make their way downstairs. Then Fuyumi or Mama would make breakfast and Izuku would watch the clock until the food was ready. He timed his head to move at the same pace of the clock, entertaining himself as everyone else grew more awake. After eating, everyone would separate and get ready for the day. Today, Izuku did not like mornings. When he tried to wake Shudo up, he was really grumpy and there was nothing Izuku could do to change his twin's mind. He tried laying on him, tugging on his arm, and promising to do whatever he wanted to today, but Shudo was being stubborn and staying firmly in bed. His next step was to knock on Fuyumi's door, which he hated because usually Shudo did the knocking and he wasn't here to do it. There was no answer and Izuku didn't feel like testing to see if the door was locked. Then he went to Natsuo's room. He knocked 3 times, waited, listened, but there was no sound coming from within. He had a brief thought of going to wake Mama up, but Mama hadn't left her room in a long time. He had to go downstairs by himself, his skin feeling itchy all over. He kept his fingers rooted in his hair as he tried to plan out how he would be getting himself breakfast. He wished Tuya was still here because Tuya always helped Izuku with everything he needed. Father was dumb and made it so Tuya didn't come back anymore and Izuku hated him. He found his way to the kitchen, only to freeze when he heard the clashing of pots and pans. Did Tuya come back? Izuku hurried around the corner, expecting to be swept up in the arms of his older brother. What he did not expect, however, was the sight of Father standing in the kitchen. "Oh, Izuku." Father's voice was heavy but, for the first time, quiet. Izuku stared at him, unblinking. Usually Father was gone in the mornings to be a hero. He was rarely seen in the Todoroki household unless he was with Tuya, but now Tuya was gone, so Izuku wasn't sure what he was doing here. He was changing the routine without a reason, and Izuku couldn't help but clench his fist and pull his hair. Izuku couldn't remember the last time he had been with his father, let alone had been with him by himself. It had probably been never. Father shuffled on his feet. He looked uncomfortable, like when Natsuo tried to cover Izuku with the scratchy, ugly blanket instead of his usual blue one that had soft corners. It was really awful and made Izuku cry because every time he kicked it off his brother would just put it back on. "You know how to make breakfast?" Izuku shook his head, looking at the man's nose. Enji sighed, picking up the child and setting him down on the counter. "Stay here while I make breakfast." The pause. "I'm taking you to a Quirk specialist today." Enji expected that to be the end of the conversation. He had stated what was happening and expected to be obeyed. He thought about his fortune of having one of his possible masterpieces stumbling into the kitchen alone, allowing him to do what needed to be done. Sure, it was just the one boy he had hands on, but he was a patient man and could take what he could get. However, his youngest child broke him out of his thoughts, fiddling with his fingers, and asked, "Why?" Enji halted his stirring movements, looking incredulously at the child. Why? Was his son mocking him? Looking down at him with narrowed eyes, Enji only saw pure curiosity. He grumbled to himself, allowing this one question to slip by. "We're going to test for your quirk. You're old enough to have one but haven't showed any signs of it. Unless you want to now." There was no answer from the tiny toddler, and Enji let it be. The boy could only be stubborn for so long after all. Izuku didn't like this new building. It was too bright, too small, and too quiet. Father was sitting beside him, having picked up his phone seconds after sitting down in a chair, and hadn't spoken a word besides ordering Izuku to be quiet. The room had nobody else in it. They walked through a side door to get here rather than the front, which didn't make a lot of sense to Izuku, but Father didn't answer any of his questions. It was also boring here. There were a few magazines lying on the table that Izuku was going through currently. He wasn't able to read many of the words on the pages, but the pictures were okay. There was one magazine that had lots of pictures of pro heroes that he knew Shudo would have enjoyed. He just wished he had his twin here to pass the time. Well, if Shudo could make up words, why couldn't Izuku? He flipped to the first page, recognizing the number 1. It was quite big on the page and hard to miss. Beside it was a picture of a muscular man wearing red, blue, and yellow. He had 2 tufts of blonde hair sticking up at the top of his head, mimicking bunny ears that made him look rather silly. He decided to name him Superman because he looked really strong and he was a man. He flipped to the next page, recognizing the hero instantly. It was a father, the flames taking up most of the page and a smirk on his lips. Izuku tugged on Father's sleeve, pointing to the magazine. He huffed, looking sharply at where Izuku's little finger was pointing, and chuckled loudly. "I see you found an article of your old man." Father sounded proud as he put his phone down and lifted Izuku out of his seat. Izuku squeaked, squirming slightly from the sudden movement, but Father readily ignored him. "Can you read, boy?" Izuku shrugged, pointing to the biggest word on the page. "Endeavor." He assumed it would be his father's hero name, and the smile on his father's face told him he was right. "Very good. I'm going to teach you every word on this page." The impromptu lesson began, and Izuku tried to soak in every word. If he could remember some of them, then he could show Shudo what he learned and teach him too, so they both could be smart. Father taught him to read words like power and flames, and other words that were a little difficult at first, but Izuku slowly got the hang of. The lesson ended when a woman came into the room and asked for them to follow her. Father set Izuku on the ground and walked away, forcing Izuku to run after them. He followed close behind his father, wary of the new surroundings. The walls were bare of anything but a few signs outside of doorways. Izuku tried to see if some of the new words he learned were on them but didn't recognize any. When they got to their destination, Father lifted him onto a table and stood on the other end of the room to talk with another man that was there. Izuku looked around the room for something to entertain himself. Beside him, he found a stand with 2 swirls coming out of it and twisting around each other. He grabbed it to investigate what it was. Enji talked with the Quirk specialist briefly, informing him of relevant details to the examination. He was known for being the top on his field, and Enji had no doubts the man could tell him what the child's quirk was. I see you found my DNA model. Enji turned to Izuku, ready to reprimand him for touching things that didn't belong to him, but the doctor seemed undisturbed. He told Izuku what it was, letting his fingers run across one side of the fake DNA strand and then the other, enrapturing the child with his knowledge. He successfully took a blood sample without the child noticing. Enji was surprised that the child shed no tears, even after having to get a swab done, but he supposed the doctor was the best in the business for a reason. A nurse came in and out of the room to take the samples and later return with the results. Enji remembered learning how, in the past, this process used to take weeks. How barbaric. He was grateful that technology had advanced enough so that results were almost received instantaneously. What concerned Enji was the concerned expression on the doctor's face. Now, you don't appear to have a mutant-type quirk, seeing as there's no physical alterations. The doctor asked the boy to lift his arms and stand on the table. He turned him around and did a full scan before allowing him to sit. You have a fire quirk and the mother has an ice quirk? And you said he has shown no signs? Correct. The doctor bit his lip. He shuffled through his papers and sighed. What is it? Enji snapped, patience wearing thin. The doctor smiled reassuringly. I'm sure I'm wrong, but I think we should take an X-ray of his foot to be sure. Enji nodded, slightly confused at the request but refused to let it show. Enji helped his son to the ground and was led by the doctor to a new room. The X-ray taking process was short and the doctor's shoulders slumped in relief. He brought the paper to Enji, pointing at his son's pinky toe in the picture. I thought your son might be quirkless because he hasn't shown signs of a fire or ice quirk. There's no fluctuation in his body temperature compared to an average child or anything of the sort. The only possibility I see is that his quirk has mutated from you and your wife's genetics, but it's impossible to determine exactly what power he possesses. He only has the one toe joint, so that guarantees he has a quirk, and the blood work came back positive for the quirk factor in his blood. His quirk just might be an invisible one that needs a proper catalyst to activate. Enji let the information run through his head. His son had a quirk, but there was no way to determine it with the tests the doctor had. However, he did have a quirk, according to the X-ray. And the blood work showed traces of the quirk factor in his blood. Until his quirk manifested or was activated, they wouldn't know what it was. I'd also suggest taking young Izuku to another doctor. The man had his shoulders back in a confident stance. His behavior throughout this exam was a little concerning, and I have reason to believe he might place on the autistic spectrum. Enji blinked in disbelief, looking at his son on the table. He hadn't spent much time with the boy, yet a complete stranger felt something was wrong with him? Thank you, doctor. Enji bowed stiffly and retreated with his son in tow. He needed to take his son to a new doctor as soon as possible. He couldn't have a broken successor. He also needed some way to activate his son's quirk. At least he had a solid plan on how to go about that. Izuku was tired from all of the traveling that took place. He was grateful when father finally told him they were going home, though his voice was much harsher than it had been that morning. The first doctor told Izuku he had an invisible quirk, which didn't make a lot of sense because Izuku knew people could see him. The doctor laughed when he said so, and explained that it wasn't Izuku that was invisible but the quirk itself. He assured Izuku that his quirk would come in soon, considering he had such a strong father in the house to guide him, but Izuku wasn't too concerned in the first place. The second doctor told him he was autistic after making him do a lot of tests. Father clenched harshly on Izuku's shoulder at the news, and the doctor wouldn't look at Izuku. The other doctor tried to explain what it meant, but a lot of the words he used didn't make a lot of sense, so he just hoped father understood instead. Father didn't say a lot to Izuku after leaving the second building, but that wasn't unusual. Izuku spent the ride home counting the different people he saw on the street, reaching 7 before starting over. Izuku felt confident in his abilities to count to 7 and couldn't wait to ask Natsuo what the next number was. Father grabbed his hand and dragged him to the house. He was walking way too fast for Izuku to catch up, and Izuku told father that, but he was ignored and tugged along. The door slammed loudly behind them and Izuku instinctively raised his free hand to cover one of his ears. He was taking Izuku to the training room he used to take Tuya. While Enji would need to alter the training regime to suit the younger boy, he was confident it would not be that difficult. He had started training Tuya when he was 7. Surely a toddler could follow a similar plan. His eyes narrowed when Natsuo stepped out of Tuya's room, looking enraged at him. There was a hint of fear in the boy's eyes, and his hands were shaking, but Enji wasn't intimidated. Enji raised a brow, challenging him to question his authority. "What are you doing with Izuku?" Natsuo asked, standing in their way. "It is no concern of yours," Enji states dangerously, stepping forward as a means to force the child to move. Natsuo flinched but remained where he stood. "He's a baby. You can't just throw him around like a toy." "I'm not a baby," Izuku muttered. "I suggest you move, boy. You don't want to force my hand." Natsuo glared defiantly, causing Enji's blood to boil. He raised a hand to strike the child for his disobedience, relishing in the rush of power as he hit the ground. The boy grasped his cheek, meeting Enji's eyes with a teary stare. "It's time to begin your training, Izuku. You need to be stronger than your pathetic older brother." At this point, Enji wasn't sure if he was referring to Natsuo or Tuya, but before he could dwell on the thought he was distracted by Izuku being tugged out of his grasp. "You won't hurt my Otuto." "Toto." It was a pathetic whimper and an inexcusable show of defiance. He whirled around, fists ablaze with the intent to hurt, but stopped short at what he was seeing. Izuku was behind his brother, his shoulders raised to his ears. His twin had 2 arms stretched out as a means to protect him. One arm was crackling with fire, the other was encased in ice. His eyes flashed greedily. He had done it. He had it. His other son. His Shudo. His masterpiece. Fuyumi was holding a screaming Izuku, trying and failing to soothe him. Not for the last time she wished for Tuya to be here. Father had a grip on Shudo's arm, who was desperately trying to get away. There was a lot of yelling in the room and Fuyumi was fighting back tears as her heart ached. Father was forcing Shudo to move into Tuya's old room, separating the 2 youngest Todorokis. Izuku had been screaming and tugging his hair, and nothing Fuyumi could say nothing to calm him down. Shudo wasn't helping by screaming for his Otudo, and a small part of Fuyumi hated Father. Couldn't he see he was hurting them? However, she refused to let Izuku go, warily watching the way Father's hell flames flared dangerously close to the children. Natsuo has joined them some time ago, yelling at Father as well. "Who gives you the right to separate them? This is my household. What I say goes. Look at them. They're upset and scared of you. You're a monster. I am doing what is right. My primary concern is with Shuto. That thing has no place near my successor. And neither do you. Izuku is not a thing. He is useless. His name might as well be Deku. His kanji can be read as such. Now I am your father and I demand you dash. Their kids. Was killing to you not. Enough for you?" Fuyumi gasped as Father struck Natsuo. Shudo went rigid and stopped trying to get away. Izuku was still hitting Fuyumi in an attempt to get to Shudo's side, but Fuyumi couldn't afford to let him get near Father. "Do not speak of sensitive matters." Father spoke coldly, quietly. "I will not tolerate any disrespect. Understood?" Natsuo glared, wiping blood from his lips, and sneered. Fuyumi wanted to yell at Natsuo to stop antagonizing Father. Fighting only brought pain to this family and she wasn't strong enough to protect all of them. "Screw you." Natsuo growled lowly. Father dismissed him by ignoring him, as if he were simply trash that had missed the garbage bin. "Shudo, grab what you want. You will not be returning to Deku's room." Shudo looked hesitant, a quick glance to Fuyumi. She gave him a nod and encouraging smile, wincing when a stray hand of Izuku's hit her cheek. Shudo moved silently to the bed and grabbed a single pillow and blanket. He left everything else, whether because he wanted to leave familiar items for his little brother or because he wanted to leave quickly, Fuyumi didn't know. Shudo didn't meet anyone's eyes as he was skirted out of the room. Natsuo angrily got to his feet and glared at Fuyumi. She looked away, unable to see him look at her so. She heard him approach the two of them and took Izuku into his arms. "You can go," he said gruffly. Fuyumi wanted to argue, but Natsuo's quirk started forming ice crystals in the air. She didn't want to start another screaming match. She left the room, her fists held close to her chest and her shoulders hunched. She didn't know how exactly she felt, just that there was a fire in her heart towards her brother and father. Fuyumi couldn't stand how much this family had torn apart since Tuya's death. A flip had been suched and she wasn't sure it was possible to turn it back. She paused near her parents' bedroom, watching Mama sit on the bed with her eyes blankly staring at the wall. She thought about calling out to her, despite knowing she would not be heard, but forced herself to walk away. Mama hadn't been cooking or cleaning ever since Tuya had passed. Fuyumi had to take up the mantle and went to bed exhausted every night. Natsuo helped occasionally, especially as he was now one of the only Todorokis who could handle one of Izuku's meltdowns. He had spent most of his free time hiding away in his room, sorting through Tuya's old things. He gave Fuyumi Tuya's old books he had collected and Fuyumi had gingerly places them on her bookshelf. She had flipped through some of the pages, her heart clenching when she saw that Tuya had made numerous anecdotes in the margins. Father hadn't shared any specific details other than a villain had killed him. Natsuo had immediately blamed Father, but Fuyumi had to disagree. Tuya was Father's favorite and destined to surpass him. He wouldn't have just let Tuya die. And Father had been devastated, leaving the house and throwing himself into his work. While Father didn't have a way with words, she could see how much his eldest son's death affected him. It also made sense that, when he finally returned, that he tried to fill the void left behind by Tuya. Fuyumi knew that Tuya's training was hard on her brother, and maybe that was why he wasn't able to get away from the villain or was too tired to escape or Father had been a second too late. He was a pro-hero after all. Even if he didn't like Tuya, he had a duty to save him if he could. Maybe Father would do right by Shuto, learn from his mistakes when training Tuya. He had stated that he would arrange Shuto's education seeing as all of the Todoroki children were homeschooled and left Izuku's schooling for Fuyumi to decide. He had told her that Izuku was autistic and thus couldn't attend the same classes and type of learning as Shuto. While it made sense, Fuyumi was disappointed to see him cast away the youngest member of the family. It was hard to see the logic behind Father's decisions, but she trusted he was doing his best. Yes, he was separating the twins who had been at each other's side for the past 5 years, but he had to have a reason. He had too. Natsuo ran his fingers through Izuku's hair, rocking back and forth with him in his lap. His sobs had long subsided, but small whines still escaped him and his hands regularly returned to his hair. He had to constantly give his brother's hands something else to grip onto and provide comfort to a boy who had lost his world. He eventually remembered the present he had ordered for Izuku after hearing from Endeavor that he was autistic. It was a chewable necklace that the website said was great for high-functioning kids to use when they got overwhelmed. He gently placed it around Izuku's neck and hoped it would work for Izuku, and if it didn't, he would simply have to find something else. He had done a lot of research on how to care for children with autism. Seeing as he grew up in an isolated household, he didn't have any experience with a kid like Izuku, nor was there anybody to ask. Tuya seemed to understand Izuku without even needing to know Izuku needed a little bit of different care. He was an awesome brother, and Natsuo strived to fill the hole he left behind in his younger brothers. He hated Endeavor. He had cast aside Izuku like he was broken the minute he returned home with him from the doctor's office. And Natsuo did the only thing he could, argue. He was constantly fighting with him when he could, his resentment fueled every time he opened Tuya's notebooks. Tuya had written a detailed plan for escape. One that would have worked perfectly had Tuya still been alive. It would have guaranteed all of their safety and made it so Endeavor could never get them back. But he couldn't follow the plan Tuya had worked towards because he wouldn't be a legal adult for many more years, nor did he have the strength to go up against Endeavor. Tuya's plan catered to his own strengths. Natsuo couldn't possibly follow in his footsteps. He also didn't have his mom on his side. She looked broken inside, often found inside her room staring at the wall. She rarely responded to anyone and barely left the room. Natsuo didn't have the heart to try and push the plan onto her, even though it would get them out sooner. That's not to say he gave up, actually. He had given a copy of the notebook to the police when he had managed to sneak out of the house but had yet to hear back from them. But until he heard from them, he would do what he could, and that meant being there for his siblings. "You're okay," Natsuo whispered, kissing the crown of Izuku's head. "I'm right here." Izuku sniffed, clutching onto Natsuo's shirt. He took him. Yumi promised he wouldn't. She promised. It took Natsuo a second to know what Izuku was talking about. It hit him that he was referring to the day Shudo discovered his quirk and Fuyumi had reassured the twins that father wouldn't separate them. Natsuo hadn't thought of that day in a while. He remembered playing soccer with Tuya on his team and Fuyumi making flower crowns and Izuku making a joke for the first time and… well, Fuyumi's words obviously backfired. "I know, Zuku, but Shudo's still in the house so you can see him when he isn't busy." Natsuo would make sure of that. He would do whatever it took to keep those kids in each other's lives as much as possible. "Do you want to watch some videos? I have Tuya's laptop." Endeavor never allowed his kids to own any technology. There was no television in the house and the only mobile phone was Endeavor's. Tuya only got a laptop because of schoolwork, but everything was heavily restricted. Well, emphasis on was because Natsuo took care of that quickly. Izuku nodded and Natsuo grabbed the laptop from his bedside table. He booted it up and inputted the password. He decided to pull up HeroTube, knowing that lots of kids were Hero fans like Shudo. He was sure he would be able to entertain the smaller boy for at least a little while before he would demand to see Shudo. "Anything look good?" Natsuo asked and Izuku carefully looked over his options before pointing to one. Natsuo looked at it closely, realizing it wasn't actually about heroes but rather their support items. Shrugging, he clicked the video and turned on the audio. He was tempted to turn it to full volume just to annoy Endeavor, but he didn't want to risk the laptop getting destroyed by his flames. Izuku was entranced by the man talking. He described the mechanics of building support items and how they planned them for specific heroes and quirks. It went into deep analysis of applying physics and chemistry to make sure a support item was designed to best suit each specific user. Izuku let his hands flap excitedly throughout the video, absorbing the words like a sponge. His mind whirled with possibilities. Shudo had always wanted to be a hero, and people who made support items to work with heroes. If Izuku could learn to make stuff like this, then he could stay by Shudo's side forever. Again. Izuku cheered once the video had ended. Natsuo raised an eyebrow. "Again? You don't want to watch another video?" In all honesty, this was the longest Natsuo had seen Izuku concentrate when he didn't have Shudo around. "Again." Izuku confirmed and Natsuo hit replay. Shudo hadn't seen his siblings in a while. Father had been training him to use his quirk, which left little free time for the bicolored boy. He was so sleepy and hungry all the time now and he didn't even get to sleep with Izuku anymore. He hoped Izuku was alright. He knew that monsters were much more likely to eat children when they were on their own, and they usually faced the monsters together. Maybe Natsuo was letting him sleep in his bed so he was protected. Natsuo wasn't scared of anything and surely wouldn't let the monsters get Izuku. Shudo still missed his brother a lot. He has always been a constant in his day-to-day life, usually only an arm's length away. He could turn and find Izuku right by his side. He was able to depend on his brother for everything and share everything, but now he wasn't there anymore and it made Shudo feel icky. It was 2 weeks of training when father had announced he was going to introduce Shudo to the media as his successor at some hero banquet. Shudo didn't want to go. It didn't sound very fun and he was told it would only be him and Endeavor. Endeavor explained it would be the perfect time to start forming his image, seeing as he would be still strong enough to surpass All Might, but that didn't make sense. All Might was the #1 hero. Shudo could never dream of being as strong as him. He kicked up a fuss, trying to convince him to leave him behind, but the pro hero wouldn't budge. He gave one last attempt as he was being dragged out to the vehicle. "No!" Shudo shouted, stomping his foot. "I'm not going unless. His eyes darted around the room until they landed on the youngest Todoroki. "Zuku comes with me. Or I'll act like a brat the whole time." Enji's jaw clenched. How dare his son defy him? He gave him everything. He went to raise his arm and strike his son for such disobedience when his eyes caught on the pink-haired boy in Natsuo's arms. The child was chewing on a RBB necklace hanging from his neck, shifting side to side in his older brother's hold. He looked ridiculously tiny in his hold, his shirt surely a size larger than his actual size. Bringing that thing would cause nothing but trouble. He had something wrong with his brain, after all. NG stared at his youngest in thought, his bright eyes reminding him of the ever-smiling #1 hero. NG would, begrudgingly, and to only himself, admit that the one thing All Might had over him was his ability to relate to the people. He could talk to anyone about anything and they would kiss the ground he stood on. He was a beacon of light for them, his stupid smile assuring them that everything would be okay in the end. The people liked All Might. They did not like Endeavor. It was well known that pro-hero Endeavor did not have a soft side. He got to the scene, took care of business swiftly, then left for the next big villain. His personal life was not shared with the media, and the only time you would see the flame hero was on patrols or in the middle of a fight with a villain. While All Might's personal history was also not shared with the world, he had a much more amiable personality. All Might regularly talked with his fans and was friendly to everyone in his vicinity. It disgusted NG that was what hero society was coming to, but it was a truth he could not change. NG could admit there was a possible benefit of bringing the child. He could use the thing's autism to improve his image by showing off his commitment to the boy as his son. The media ate that sheet up, always looking for things that either brought a hero up in the charts or brutally cut them down. Deku could prove useful in one way as Endeavor could be viewed as an ambassador for whatever was wrong with him. But was the trouble bringing the young boy worth it? The useless thing would only damage his. A laugh pierced the air and NG whirled around to find the cause, only to find his youngest child laughing at seemingly nothing. The child only reminded him of All Might more. He felt a sneer tug at his face. The thing was useless to him. He needed to focus on Shudo becoming his successor, and that began with getting his son into the vehicle, one way or another. He went to grab Shudo, prepared to deal with screaming and pitiful kicks, when he saw the desperate look he cast to his twin. He was suddenly struck by an epiphany. All Might was a hero because he wanted to be a symbol of peace and share his smile with the world, or whatever bullshit was in his tagline. Endeavor was a hero because he wanted to prove he was the best and was the strongest, that he could defeat any villain in his way. Tuya didn't have any of that. There was nothing NG could use to force the boy to achieve greatness. But Shudo just gave him one. NG could exploit the one thing Tuya did not have. A motivation. Fine. NG straightened his posture and looked down at his soon-to-be successor. Deku is free to join us. But you will be in charge of making sure it behaves. It is your responsibility and I will not be made a fool. Do I make myself clear? Yes, father. Shudo bowed his head. NG grunted impatiently and made his way to the vehicle out front. Shudo approached Izuku with a smile, holding out a hand. Let's go, Otuto. Izuku slid off Natsuo's lap and took his brother's hand. It was a familiar weight and Shudo felt his shoulders relax instantaneously. He led him to the front door, which Endeavor was impatiently holding open, and together the two walked towards the waiting limo. Izuku decided that he probably should have stayed at home. Don't get him wrong. He loved Shudo and would do anything for him. If Shudo went outside, Izuku went outside. If Shudo wanted a nap, Izuku would nap with him. If Shudo was hungry, Izuku would go with him to the kitchen. However, he did not like the bright flashing lights and how loud everyone was being and wished Shudo didn't have to go. He liked the car and how quiet it was. The car seat was smooth and Izuku loved running his hand up and down the fabric. The seatbelt wasn't very nice but Shudo stopped him from taking it off. Shudo had to hold his hand, which he guessed was a fair enough trade-off. Father didn't talk and Shudo was squished against his side securely, granting a welcoming pressure to Izuku's body. They spoke quietly about the buildings they passed, creating stories about the people that could be inside. Izuku could have stayed there forever. But they soon had to leave and Shudo guided Izuku down a bright red carpet behind their father. There was a lot of people screaming, Endeavor, and Izuku pressed his hands over his ears and stopped walking. The noise was drilling into his brain and Izuku started whimpering in order to ground himself. He wanted to tug his hair, but then he'd be leaving his ear open and that would not be ideal. Shuto resorted to nearly dragging his twin across the floor, and probably would have if Izuku didn't see that they were going into a building, and a building meant it would be away from all these noisy people. The man at the door that let them in commented how cute the two of them looked, and Endeavor didn't spare a second glance. Izuku gave a small wave and was granted a smile and wave in return. He liked that man, he decided. Endeavor led them to a wide open room with a lot of other people there. Izuku recognized some of them from the video Natsuo showed him. They were heroes. Izuku could pick out Crimson Riot and Gang Orca and Best Jeanist and Sir Night Eye and Celeritas and… Look, Zuku! Shuto tugged lightly on his sleeve and pointed at a muscular man standing in the middle. He was standing next to Sir Night Eye, and Izuku recognized him instantly. It's All Might, the #1 hero. Endeavor turned around sharply at Shuto's declaration and both twins flinched. Before anyone could say anything more on the subject, All Might had looked over and saw the Todorokis. Izuku watched his smile widen as he excused himself from the woman he was talking with and made his way over. Enji, my good friend. All Might clapped Endeavor's shoulder with a wide grin and chuckle. Long time no see. Who are these dashing young gentlemen? He smiled at them both, and Izuku is not sure if either of them returned the gesture. Endeavor pulled his arm away from the loud man. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere but here, and Izuku could relate. His father gestured to him and his brother. This is Shuto, my soon-to-be successor, and this is Deku, my youngest. Izuku frowned at the nickname father had been calling him the past few weeks but didn't comment. It wasn't a very nice name, considering it literally meant useless, but now wasn't the time to make a fuss. He was told to be on his best behavior, and he didn't want to make father angry at Shuto when they got home. He couldn't protect Shuto from Endeavor's training, but he could try to make it hurt less. All Might knelt in front of them, taking in the similarities to their old man. Izuku personally didn't see them, although everyone compared Shuto to their father. Shuto was Shuto, end of story. All Might nodded almost approvingly before rising to his feet. He turned back towards Endeavor. These boys will make history if they're anything like their father. Endeavor's jaw clenched, but he did not say anything. All Might turned and caught sight of his sidekick walking towards him. He grabbed the man's arm so they were standing side by side. I'm not sure if you've met my sidekick, Sir Night Eye. He is an intelligent man, extremely capable on and off the field, and I wouldn't want anyone else by my side. Izuku watched said man in awe as he bowed slightly in greeting. He missed whatever comment his father made towards the man as he stepped forward, shifting on his feet as he waited patiently to be noticed. Miria had noticed the child staring at him for the past few minutes, though he had hoped they would have stopped by now. He had a bush of pink hair on his head that seemed untamable, especially when comparing the two brothers side by side. It was concerning, seeing one of them dressed in a small suit and the other as if they had come in hand-me-down pajamas. The one beside him, in the pajamas, was absently chewing on a necklace as he stared directly at him, and Mirai tried to avert his gaze. His brother was standing slightly behind their father and to the side, head down and silent. The smaller of the two, that was currently staring at him, seemed completely focused on him. It was evident that the child would not be satiated until he acknowledged them, so he turned to the child and smiled, hopefully displaying a look of ease rather than his dread. How can I help you? You use hyperdensity seals. The child sounded out slowly. It took Mirai a second to realize it was a question. I do. He prayed the child did not wish to see them. I saw a video about them. It was the first time he could see the boy attempt to make eye contact, though looking closely, the kid was fixated on the edge of his glasses. They're super strong. The child seemed satisfied with this conversation and returned to his brother's side. Mirai felt like he had been dismissed and wasn't quite sure how to feel about it. He also didn't know how to feel about the interaction. Usually, when children approached him, their questions were all about All Might. Well, everyone who approached him wanted to talk about All Might, from reporters to the other heroes they worked with. It was refreshing to have a conversation about his career as a hero, even though the kid was obviously more invested in his support item rather than what he did as a hero. As he tuned into the conversation between the top two heroes, He couldn't help but notice how Endeavor's children stood off to the side, quiet and obedient. These kids couldn't be more than 4 or 5, and one look around the room would tell you that the other children were engaged in either a race or battle to the death, if the screaming was any indication. It didn't escape his attention that these kids deeply contrasted the others. It seemed that they did not even know that venturing from their father was even an option. And maybe it wasn't. He quickly glanced around the room for a particular family. He had connections with them through All Might, as they were one of the wealthiest families in Japan due to their involvement in the hero industry. They were responsible for supporting many manufacturers and engineers in the heroing business and have been since the legalization of Quirk usage. He caught eyes with the woman he was looking for and beckoned her over. She smiled at him and grabbed her husband and daughter as she made her way over. She was an appealing woman. Long, silky black hair and immaculate makeup. Her golden dress twinkled under the lights and her smile was both genuine and wide. "Sir Knight I," she greeted with a small bow. He returned the gesture. "Good evening, Yayarozu-san. I have some young gentlemen here who might want to meet your daughter." The little girl peeked from around her mother's legs. The red and white-haired Todoroki timidly approached Mirai's side with his younger brother in tow. Yayarozu-san was positively delighted by the young boys. "Oh, aren't they precious? Momo, introduce yourself." The little girl, Momo, stepped forward awkwardly. She mumbled her name with a small bow. Mirai watched the two boys stare at her in silence. Shuto stood stoically at his side while Deku's eyes were trained to the ground. Neither indicated that they would be speaking anytime soon. Had these children never met another child their age? As the silence grew on, Mirai decided to step in. "These boys are Shuto and Deku. Endeavor's children." Both boys flinched at the second child's name and Mirai couldn't blame them. Who would name their child useless? At the mention of his own name, Endeavor rounded on the conversation. His nostrils flared, as did his fiery beard. What is the meaning of this? Mirai almost took a step back in shock from how angry the man sounded. All Might didn't bat an eye, patting the number 2 hero on the shoulder. "They're making friends, NG. Surely you haven't forgotten that kids tend to flock together." Endeavor let out a growl and Mirai's eyes narrowed at his next comment. "My boys have no time for friends." What kind of father was this man? All Might's grin was slightly strained. "Well, think of it as networking for the future. Everyone should have connections in their life. Shuto will not need anyone." Endeavor scoffed. "He will become the best and surpass even you." What an arrogant statement. Mirai's lip curled, both at the possessive tone and the fact that he omitted his other son. He had no qualms about showing his displeasure on his face. And apparently, neither did the Yayarozu family. "Well, these boys must be hungry if you had to drive all the way here." Yayarozu-san interjected, looking the pro-hero in the eye and daring him to defy her. "I'll take them for a snack." Mirai was deeply satisfied by the pinched expression on Endeavor's face. It was obvious he had no choice but to let his children go, lest he wanted to start a fight with such an influential family. He looked to Shuto and nodded once without exchanging any words. Mirai was disturbed by how the two boys seemed to curl in on themselves and hoped that Yayarozu-san would be able to break them out of their shells. Shuto turned his eyes to the ground and took his brother by the hand. He stood beside the girl who introduced herself as Momo as Endeavor was dragged away by All Might to go talk to some other heroes. He was grateful for getting a small break from him, already breathing easier as the distance between them grew. Well, wasn't he pleasant? The lady, who Shuto assumed was Momo's mother, stated. It did not sound like a question and Shuto knew better than to ask her to elaborate. She led them to a table against the far wall, talking a mile a minute to the pair. Shuto took over talking, seeing as Izuku was currently unable to form any sort of response. She asked about what they liked to do and food they enjoyed, never pushing Izuku to contribute. Shuto liked her, even though he couldn't help but compare the woman to Mama and Fuyumi. While his family were more reserved in their expression, Yayarozu-san was vibrant like the paintings Mama used to make before. "Momo here wants to be a hero when she grows up," Yayarozu-san went on. "What do you want to be?" Shuto jumped when Izuku's head whipped up excitedly and he bounced on his feet. I want to make support items. Shudo was surprised by that answer. He didn't know his brother had any interest in working alongside heroes. He listened attentively as his brother went on about the different kind of support items and how they suited specific quirks. He was proud his Otudo was so smart. He barely noticed when Momo came to his side and started speaking softly. Your brother's super smart. Shudo nodded, a small smile on his lips. When was the last time he smiled? He really is. She grinned. Are you going to be a hero, too? So your brother can make your support items. Shudo thought about it. It would be nice to have someone he trusted to work alongside. Endeavor would never allow Shudo to work with anyone else, but if he let Izuku come with them to this event, surely he could convince him of Izuku's use? Yeah. Will be unstoppable. The Todoroki twins blew up the internet after first premiering. The press had gotten numerous photos and videos of the two small boys walking behind their father into the building that was hosting the annual Pro Hero banquet. The smaller pink-haired boy was carefully guided by the taller heterochromic boy. In some shots it seemed that Endeavor was blocking them from the cameras, glaring at anyone who got too close. Wholesome memes were spread across various social media platforms, and seeing some of them was considered good luck. There were memes who labeled the twins as the extrovert friend taking their introvert friend out for a walk, and memes comparing the two boys to puppies. Their adorableness was only accentuated by their attire. The red and white-haired boy was dressed in a little suit that mirrored their father's, while the pink-haired boy was in a loose shirt with the word shirt on it and what appeared to be pajama briefs. After reviewing the footage of the little family, there was a conclusion everyone came to, and everyone was trying to be the first to report it. It was evident that one of the twins was autistic, considering the near meltdown that almost occurred on camera. Experts were brought in to analyze their behavior from short 15-second clips showing the twins, and everyone had an opinion to give on the younger boy's mannerisms. Many news stations liked to bring the boy's hypothetical autism up, illustrating the healthy dynamic the two twins had with their father, based on what they saw on camera. It would be surprising that two young children could take the news by storm if it wasn't for the fact that they were the children of the number 2 hero and that the current number 1 had no family to speak of. Endeavor was praised by the media for his apparent lenience with his youngest son, as he allowed him to wear such clothing to an event. It was important for kids like him to be comfortable, after all. He was praised for leading his boys quickly into the building. It was important for him to prevent undue stress on his child, after all. He was praised for being such a good and attentive father. He was a hero, after all. Staring at the small television in front of him in his ratty apartment, Dobby could feel his quirk thrumming under his skin. It was infuriating to see the man be praised for qualities he didn't have. It was laughable that the media used the words endeavor and lenient in the same sentence, let alone caring father. W was Dobby now. He hadn't used his old name since he woke up from that hell studied the scene currently playing. His brothers looked no worse for wear. At least, nothing blatantly noticeable. He could still see how their shoulders were hunched and their eyes were trained to the ground. He was surprised when he originally saw little Izuku come out of the limousine in pajamas, no less until he saw the news the next morning. Of course, Endeavor was low enough to use his children to improve his image. Just look what he did to him. Dobby absently rubbed his jaw where the staples were holding his burnt skin together. It was the only option he had for medical intervention, considering he was legally dead. He should count himself lucky that he was in the state he was in rather than dead, but all he could feel was anger. He knew he wouldn't be happy until Endeavor had paid for his crimes. Dobby's greatest fear was that Shudo would become their father. He could already see the apathetic, cold look in his eyes that mirrored Endeavor's. There was no telling who Shudo would become as the years progressed, and Dobby hated the thought of not being there to see it or prevent it. The only time his eyes softened was when he looked back to grab Izuku's hand and guide him to the building. There was still hope he could get them out. Dobby turned the television off after the news turned to All Might's appearance at the banquet. He sat on the lumpy recliner, his hands folded in his lap squeezed together. He resisted the urge to grab the burner phone on the table. It only had one number in it, but he wasn't quite desperate enough to reach out to him for help quite yet. He also owed the man for stitching him back together, and wasn't sure he would be able to pay back a second favor. His eyes closed as he thought back to his two youngest siblings. They were in the public eye now, so they should be fairly safe. The media would notice if anything was going wrong. Endeavor would be scrutinized for any wrong move, especially now that many people had taken to adopting the two youngest Todorokis. They would be safe for now, until he thought of a plan. He wished he had his notebook with him. His stomach rumbled, reminding him how long it had been until he last ate. He pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the slowly growing mold in the corner of the kitchen as he made his way to the door. Mama was acting weird. Even Natsuo and Fuyumi thought so. Izuku had asked them what was wrong with Mama, but all they told him was that she was very sad because Tuya was gone. Izuku was sad too because Tuya was a great older brother, but he wasn't acting like Mama. It just didn't make sense to him. Izuku watched his mother over the past few days as she seemed to glide across the floor without being aware of her surroundings. She walked past his siblings without a second glance and wouldn't acknowledge them, even if they called out to her. The only one she would respond to was Izuku on occasion, and it was only when he grabbed onto her skirt and refused to let go. However, if he did that, then Mama would pick him up and he wouldn't leave her hip for hours. Mama refused to go near Shuto, which made staying on Mama's hip unbearable. If Shuto came into the room, Mama was quick to whisk the two of them out of it. Izuku was torn with what to do. On one hand, Mama really needed him right now because she was really sad, but Shuto must be really lonely without Izuku with him. Fuyumi was sad too, but she wouldn't let Izuku be by her. She was becoming more like a new Mama every day and pulling further and further away from her brothers. She still smiled and ruffled his hair and made food for them, but she didn't read stories anymore or play in the backyard. And Natsuo was really angry when he was by himself. So Izuku tried to watch HeroTube videos, but eventually Natsuo claimed he needed to be alone. Everyone was sad and there was only so much he could do. He couldn't be with everyone all the time, and those that do want him around usually can't because of something else. If Mama was still Mama, then maybe Fuyumi could play with Izuku and Natsuo would laugh again, a sound Izuku hadn't heard in a long time. Izuku had heard Natsuo plead with Mama to talk to him, but she hadn't spoken a word except to Izuku. She would kiss his forehead and whisper, "It's okay. I'll keep you safe," over and over again. He didn't know what she would keep him safe from, but he would just hold on to her anyway, hoping his hug would fix her like Tuya's did for him. Even though everyone in the house was sad, Izuku was trying his best. He knew Father was sad as well because he used to spend a lot of time with Tuya and now he can't. Father was sad because he wasn't as loud anymore and he was out of the house more often. Izuku wanted to make him feel better, but he also knew better than to try and help with Father's sadness. He didn't really like Izuku too much. Father spent most of his time either with Shuto or at hero work. While Father was with Shuto, Izuku would either spend time with Mama or Natsuo. Mama would just hold him on the couch and slide his hair, rocking him slowly in her grasp. Natsuo would watch cool support item videos on the laptop and let him pick the ones they watched, or they would go outside and kick a soccer ball back and forth. When Father was not with Shuto, then the pair would spend limited time together in Izuku's now room. All of their toys were in there, as few of them as there were, and also some of Tuya's old stuff that Natsuo had given them. Natsuo had given them Tuya's lamp and a plastic cactus that used to sit on his desk, as well as some of his clothes he had packed up after growing out of them. Shuto and Izuku agreed that the cactus should be back in Tuya's old room where it belonged, but kept the rest of his things in Izuku's room. One of the things the twins liked to do was dress in Tuya's old clothes. There was an ashy scent to his clothes accompanied by cinnamon from the soap he used to use. Most of the clothes were too big for Izuku and Shuto, but they still liked to wear them. Izuku liked to curl up in Tuya's old hoodies at night when he was scared the monsters would get him. The scent of Tuya had always reminded Izuku of safety. Shuto kept a hoodie in his room for the same reason. However, there were a few times when Father insisted Izuku come to Shuto's training sessions. He would be asked to sit in the corner of one of the training rooms as Shuto was taught how to strengthen his quirk. Father always started by pushing him to create as much fire as he could before switching to ice. Father would make Shuto push past his limits with one side of his quirk, creating ice until frost formed across his face or flames until skin began peeling on his cheek. Izuku was always entranced by his brother's display of power and resilience to persevere. His quirk was so appealing and had so many opportunities to be paired with great support items. Eventually, Father would train Shudo to use both sides of his quirk at the same time. It took a lot more concentration from the older twin, but it still had an impressive outcome. Shudo looked incredible when using both sides simultaneously, looking exactly like a top pro hero would. Whenever he began slowing down, Father would point at Izuku and Shudo would renew his efforts. Izuku was happy his presence helped Shudo do his best. He wished he could be here all the time to help Shudo become the best hero he could, but Father would never allow it. Shudo knew better than to give up on pushing his quirk past his limits. He knew the consequences if he were to stop before Endeavor said so. When they got home from the banquet where Shudo was announced as Endeavor's successor, Shudo was informed on what would happen if he failed to obey his plan. If Shudo couldn't keep up with training, then Endeavor thought perhaps he should turn to the next person. Shudo would do everything he could to prevent his Otudo from facing the true Endeavor. He could remember clearly the burns and bruises Tuya always had littering his arms. While Father had privately admitted to Shudo he may have pushed his eldest son too fast too quickly, Shudo knew he couldn't fail to comply with the training regime Endeavor had planned for him. "Is that your best, Shudo?" Endeavor had asked, an eyebrow quirked. Both Todorokis eyed the small boy in the corner, chewing on his necklace. Shudo built his mountain of ice higher, shivering as his cheek burned from the cold. It didn't escape Shudo that Izuku's eyes widened in delight at the ice tower and a small smile twitched across his lips. Endeavor hummed and a deliberate click echoed throughout the training room. Shudo let his right arm drop down to his side, trembling from the cold that had long since seeped into his bones. "That's 3 minutes of continually using your ice." Endeavor noted. Shudo did not comment. He was not supposed to. "You're advancing much more quickly then." "It doesn't matter. I want you to melt your ice now and continue using your fire. Then hold it for 3 minutes. Shudo nodded, his teeth chattering as he raised his left arm. He let his fingers flicker to life before building the flame, feeling the frost slowly recede from his cheek. The ice slowly melted, the water puddling onto the floor before vaporizing from the heat. Shudo could feel himself slowly warming up and welcomed the heat gratefully. When the ice had completely melted, Endeavor clicked the timer to start and Shudo's eyes narrowed in determination. Mama was in another one of her moods. She had picked Izuku up sometime after breakfast and had yet to put him down. She carried him around the house as she did some tidying and Shudo did his best to stay out of her way to prevent upsetting her. He wasn't sure why exactly he made Mama sad, but he would stay away until she felt better. It was nearing lunchtime that Shudo decided to brave the kitchen. His tutor had dismissed him for the meal and his immediate thoughts were to go look for Fuyumi to make lunch. He went to go find her but discovered she was still doing her lessons with her own tutor. He didn't feel like bugging Natsuo, knowing the other had very limited skills in the kitchen if he was on a time constraint, and Shudo didn't feel like eating anything raw or burnt. He yawned, rubbing his eyes as he approached the kitchen, trying to remember what was in the fridge. He wasn't allowed to use the stove, so anything he made would have to be handmade, like a sandwich, unless Fuyumi had pre-made something for him. He really hoped she did because then "I can't take it anymore." Shudo stopped in the doorway of the kitchen, spotting Mama on the phone with Izuku on her hip. He debated walking away, not wanting to upset Mama further with him being there. But something made him stay. Every day, the children seem more like him. And not Izuku, but I see him in Shudo. That child's left side looks unbearable to me. Mama was almost sobbing into the phone and Izuku was hugging her like his life depended on it. All I can see is his father. I can't raise him anymore. A wave of hurt crashed over Shudo but he pushed it down. He knew he looked like Father. Half of him, anyway. One half was from Mama and the other was from Father, but he couldn't control that. "Mama?" He called out timidly. Surely she didn't hate him, did she? The kettle was whistling on the stove, filling the silence between them. Izuku was tucked in Mama's arms, seemingly trying to wiggle down from her hold, but Mama didn't appear to notice. "I won't let you hurt Izuku too." The next thing he felt was a blinding pain in his left eye as boiling water splashed across his face. Someone was screaming and it took him a second to realize it was him. "Toto!" Izuku yelled and Shudo wanted his Otuto to lay across him like they used to when they shared the same room and make everything go away. Oh no 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 no. Mama whispered. He heard her drop to her knees and hold a cold hand to his eye. My baby. My Shudo. I didn't mean. I thought. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. Tears were entering down his cheeks and he clasped Mama's unused hand in his own while the other rested over Mama's corked hand. He wanted to let her know it was okay, that he was okay, but he was sobbing too hard to say anything. There was a flurry of footsteps that entered the kitchen then. A gasp from someone in the doorway and someone else had knelt beside them. He pried one eye open to see Fuyumi had knelt beside Mama, a hand over her mouth and the other on Mama's shoulder. Natsuo had picked a crying Izuku off the floor and was trying to calm him down by rocking him in his hold. Izuku was clutching Natsuo's shoulder and keening as if he were in pain. It came as no surprise when the commotion caught the attention of Father. He had thundered into the room as he always did, eyes scanning the kitchen for villains before landing on Shudo's hunched form. Dan, you woman, what are you doing? Father cursed as he ripped her cool, comforting hand from Shudo. She remained limp against the cupboards, unwilling to speak or move. Fuyumi scrambled to Mama's side, giving her a side hug to protect her from the man who had completely ignored her after casting her aside. Natsuo had held Izuku closer to his chest, glaring at Father as he moved towards Shudo. Sheet. Father brushed a thumb across the burn and Shudo hissed at the touch. Up you go. Father muttered under his breath before hauling Shudo up into his arms and out of the room. The next few hours were spent in a hospital room alone. Well, there were nurses and doctors running around to treat his burn, but Father was nowhere in sight and neither Mama nor Fuyumi nor Natsuo nor Izuku were here to keep him company and hold his hand. They had to clean his eye carefully, though nothing could keep him from whimpering and crying. The nurses kept telling him what a brave boy he was for letting them treat the wound, but Shudo felt anything but. He wanted Izuku desperately and was willing to trade anything at this point to have him by his side. The doctor wrapped his eye with a strange bandage, telling him not to touch it if he could help it. The doctor had left after letting him pick a candy from a jar. Shudo remained sitting in his room for another hour before Father had returned to collect him. He looked angry at the sight of Shudo but did not say anything beyond a gruff, "Let's go." Father had told him he had to take medicine to make sure his burn wouldn't get infected, clenching his fists as he also told him the burn was going to scar because Mama had used her quirk on it. Shudo didn't respond, knowing it wouldn't matter. He was going to take the medicine whether he wanted it or not. He was carried into the house, which was eerily quiet. Father set him down as soon as they were through the door, telling him to go to Deku's room. Shudo didn't question this gift, scrambling to get his shoes off and racing up the stairs. He didn't bother knocking, just throwing the door open. Inside was Natsuo and Izuku watching a video on a laptop. Izuku had instantly leaped off the bed when spotting Shudo, falling into him in his haste to hug him and ensure he was okay. Shudo hugged back just as strongly, letting Izuku's smaller fingers dig into Shudo's back. Izuku let go after a few minutes to let a gentle finger trail across the bandage. A pout settled on his face. Hurt. Hurts a little, but it's better, Shudo told him. Natsuo approached next and scooped the two of them into a hug, pressing a kiss to each of their heads. Nothing else was said between the three for the rest of the evening. The following years were not kind to the Todoroki family. Fuyumi had completely transformed from the loving older sister to a step-in mother figure that kept the kids at arms. Her smiles were a little less wide, a little less genuine, and everyone saw her less and less. She cleaned and cooked and ensured all the individual needs in the household were met, but outside of that no one ever saw her. The only guaranteed time one could cross paths with her was at the dining table during mealtimes. Where she used to indulge in hugs and forehead kisses, she now ruffled their hair and squeezed their shoulders. She graduated her schooling with little fanfare. A small family dinner was prepared by Enji, who ordered food from Fuyumi's favorite restaurant, and Natsuo glared at his plate and the twins never spoke a word. Enji had grunted in acknowledgement of her accomplishments and Fuyumi gave a half-hearted nod in response. She went off to a nearby university to get her teaching degree, resulting in the household growing even quieter. Her siblings hadn't even known what she planned to do after school until Izuku stumbled across her acceptance letter in the kitchen and asked what it was. She promised she wouldn't be moving out, but she wasn't truly there anyway. Natsuo took control of his schooling once he was of age to go to high school, immediately taking the entrance exams to a school that both had a great soccer program and was far away from Endeavor. He left early in the mornings and returned late at night, and sometimes, he never came home until the next day, opting to spend that time at a friend or teammate's house. While he kept the fire of hatred in his heart towards Endeavor, he still attempted to be there for the twins. He would pull them into his room after a long day and put on movies and let them cuddle in his blankets on his bed while he holds them tight. Natsuo spoke every day of going to college for medical welfare, bringing up loudly how he would be actually helping people who are hurt rather than causing more damage to civilians' already horrible day. When graduation came, Natsuo was already packed to leave for school. Fuyumi hugged him tearfully, a rare show of emotion. Shudo and Izuku, 13 at the time, had been given time from training to wish their brother goodbye. Shudo had awkwardly shuffled over to the older boy, stiffening the second he was pulled into a hug. Izuku, chewing on his necklace, gave the opposite response, melting into the gentle but sturdy embrace. He promised he would return to visit, but he truly didn't want to be there. Enji remained relatively the same. He was still the number 2 hero, Endeavor, the flame hero, more than he was Enji Todoroki. He still oversaw Shudo's every move, trained him until he couldn't stand, and dragged him to every hero convention, interview, ranking ceremony, banquet, and other social events that Endeavor was needed for. While Shudo's training regime was significantly altered compared to Tuya's, as the man feared, above all else, that his precious masterpiece would meet the same fate of his eldest, the boy was still pushed past every limit to achieve his best and surpass the walls Enji himself could never even dream of reaching. His other children didn't exist past making sure they had enough funds to attend school and any extracurriculars, as he knew that if Shudo were to reach his highest potential he would need all of Enji's attention and focus. He still fought with Natsuo every time he was provoked. He still depended on Fuyumi to fill the role of housekeeper. He still kept Deku around to motivate Shudo in the training room. He still hated All Might with every fiber of his being. He still used his 2 youngest sons to improve his image. He promised Shudo would surpass All Might but was pushing him further from heroic ideals. Shudo withdrew farther and farther within himself with each passing day. In the beginning of his training, he would reach out to Izuku, his twin, his other half, in an attempt for some form of stability and normalcy, until a training incident occurred where Izuku got badly burned by his left side. Shudo was just so tired and his ice wasn't protecting him from Endeavor's hell minefield, so he desperately lashed out with his left arm, shooting out a wave of flame to pierce through Endeavor's attack. Izuku's cry of pain had echoed in his dreams for months afterward. He flinched away from Izuku any time his bandaged hand reached towards him, fearing his father's half would harm his brother again. He kept Izuku at arm's length, even going as far as to eventually have the other 11-year-old back to his room so they stayed in separate parts of the house. Izuku was still present for every event and training session, but he kept to himself, same as Shudo did. Shudo spent all of his time training his ice and refusing his father, no matter what Endeavor threw at him. He had to better than, just better. He pushed himself until the beginning of frostbite nipped his cheek. He pushed himself until he was throwing up breakfast. He pushed himself even further beyond, counting down the days until the recommendation exam for UA. He would not be the one to fail Izuku, like everyone else had before. He promised to protect Izuku, but he was only pushing him further away. Izuku didn't know what he did wrong. He didn't know why Shudo didn't want to be around him anymore and wouldn't let him hold his hand and didn't want to share a room anymore. He didn't know why Fuyumi wouldn't read stories anymore or play in the garden or tuck him into bed. He didn't know why Natsuo didn't come home after school or take them to the backyard to play soccer or do homework together at the kitchen table. He didn't know why father refused to let him be by himself or stopped him from muttering himself while he was working on quirks and support items. Everything was changing and he just didn't understand. He didn't understand a lot, but he did know one thing. He knew was that he needed to keep analyzing quirks and working on support items so he could stay with Shudo. He spent hours with Natsuo's laptop when it was available, searching up fights on HeroTube and writing everything he possibly could about the quirk the heroes and villains had, as well as the different fighting styles each displayed. Natsuo had eventually gifted the laptop to Izuku before leaving for college, and Izuku took great care of it. He had acquired numerous notebooks to draw support items, storing them until the time came that he could work with Shudo at his own hero agency. He knew he wouldn't be able to go with Shudo to UA. He was several years behind in schooling, according to his father. He tried, honestly he did, but certain topics just couldn't stick and most of the tutors hired for him didn't have the patience to help him. Izuku just got more and more frustrated and often couldn't finish assignments to finish several school years. So, he decided he would have to wait until Shudo graduated. He promised he wouldn't be left behind, and he intended to keep that promise. Shudo was triple-checking his bag after stuffing the lunch Fuyumi made him this morning in said bag. He felt oddly calm for it being the morning of the UA entrance exam, but he knew he was ready. He had a good rest the night before, even more so since Endeavor had ended training early so he would have more energy for the coming day. He was vaguely wondering if he could stop somewhere to get Natsuo a birthday present after the exam when his father's voice interrupted his train of thought. "You're taking Deku with you." Shudo frowned at his father's words, quickly glancing over at the younger boy. Deku was scribbling away in one of his notebooks, absent-mindedly chewing on a new RBB necklace Natsuo had bought him. It resembled present mixed directional speaker, and his brother was rarely seen with it off. "Why?" Shudo asked. It was the morning of the exam and Shudo was leaving in his father's vehicle in 5 minutes. He had just finished grabbing his bag, packing his phone, wallet, and paperwork, and wanted to get out of the house as soon as possible. Don't get him wrong, he would love for his brother to come with him. It would serve as a good reminder of why he was doing all of this, but it didn't make sense why he would ask for Izuku to come with, especially considering Izuku was never allowed to leave the house unless permitted by their father. That only happened when it was ensured that Izuku wouldn't have an opportunity to wander off, which coincidentally was only during hero events that Endeavor was required to attend. "He can't stay here by himself, Shudo?" He raised an eyebrow, as if this were an obvious statement. He resisted the urge to sigh. It made sense now, considering how father viewed Izuku as incompetent, useless, a Deku. Shudo blinked once, twice. Fine. He didn't have time to argue, nor the longing to push the issue when he had to leave the house in less than 3 minutes. "Izuku, grab your backpack," Shudo told him, referencing the atrociously bright yellow bag with various hero pins on it. Natsuo had gotten most of them for Izuku, picking them up from merch shops after school and ordering them online. Izuku took great care of all of them and never left the house without it. The media ate it up, and multiple blogs ran lists of the pro heroes he had pinned on the bag. He returned to the kitchen to grab Izuku's portion of lunch while Izuku grabbed his backpack, not moving nearly as fast as Shudo would have liked. He was half tempted to go after his brother when his scheduled departure time passed, but Izuku had made an appearance shortly after. They met at the door and walked silently to the vehicle. Shudo let Izuku sit first before sliding in beside him. The hum of the vehicle was almost silent, and Shudo hated it. The lack of sound only served to remind him of who his father was, how rich and influential he was, and his fist clenched unconsciously. Izuku was chewing on his necklace with one hand firmly planted in his hair. The tension in his body was obvious, and it was no doubt due to the rapid change in routine. Izuku never did well with change, becoming stressed out when his routine was altered in any way. When they were younger, there was a lot of screaming and crying and throwing himself to the floor. Now, Izuku had certain, more subtle tics that showed when he was stressed, such as the hair pulling. Shudo hesitated with his left hand before reaching across himself with his right to carefully untangle Izuku's fingers. There was a slight whine, but instead of having his hand return to his hair, he dug into his bag and pulled out the notebook he was working on this morning. Izuku flipped open to one of his pages, one that appeared to almost be complete. Shudo was surprised by the intricate design of arm bracers that looked like grenades. There were measurements lining each piece, and there was a list of materials needed to build the support item. There were notes in the margins for volume of, was that nitroglycerin? Shudo hesitated in speaking, suddenly feeling unsure. It had been a while since he had been able to talk so easily to Izuku, and he wasn't sure what to say. Was it even allowed? What's this? Shudo finally asked softly. Izuku didn't startle like he thought he would. Instead, he eagerly pushed the notebook into Shudo's lap, eyes shining in excitement. I saw it on HeroTube. The explosions? His quirk is so strong. Could you imagine what he could do with stored nitroglycerin to increase explosion size? The bracers store up the excess nitrates he sweats, and if he had some sort of trigger to release and control the explosion, imagine the potential. Todo. Shudo's heart did a funny thing at hearing the childhood nickname. He nodded slowly, getting the gist of what he was doing but not really the why. Before he could comment or ask who exactly had an explosion quirk, Izuku was flipping to other pages, explaining the other designs he had created and the quirk that accompanied or inspired it. Shudo sat back and listened, leaning slightly into the added weight Izuku was applying to his side as he flipped through his notebook, bringing his attention to every detail on the page. Shudo couldn't help thinking, when did he do all this? It was far too soon that they arrived at the campus. Izuku was still explaining a digital watch that could project a bigger screen in the air. It would allow heroes to interact with databases during missions and could be programmed to contact other heroes in the area, work as a translator, and send and intercept messages running through various radio waves. It was incredibly detailed, and there were stapled pages that were filled with how Izuku would code it all. It was another language to Shudo, but his brother evidently knew what he was talking about. When the vehicle was parked, Shudo guided his brother to the gates, keeping a firm grasp on his smaller hand. He didn't want him to get lost, especially when he hadn't been here before. They both got signed in for the exam, and Shudo made his way to the classroom that would serve as a waiting room until the beginning of the exam. Izuku stiffened in the doorway upon arrival. Confused, Shudo turned back to his brother. What's wrong? Izuku's right hand gripped tight on his backpack. It's loud. Shudo frowned, not completely understanding. It's loud? Izuku nodded, and Shudo was still clueless. He sighed, resisting the urge to pinch the bridge of his nose. Okay. You can stay out here, all right? I'll come back and get you once the exam is over. Don't move from this spot. Izuku released his hand and went to the wall, sitting down and placing his backpack beside him. Shudo grabbed out Izuku's lunch, passing it down to him for later. Izuku nodded in acknowledgement, taking the container and placing it in the bottom of his bag. Shudo hesitated, not sure if leaving Izuku to his own devices was okay. While his brother was smart as proven by his notebooks, but he had never been by himself outside of the house. He shook his head, walking into the classroom. He would have to trust Izuku to be fine. Izuku was rummaging through his bag, looking for his ruler. He wanted to finish his design for a more streamlined version of present mixed directional speaker. He really liked the voice hero. He seemed very nice, and his radio show, Put Your Hands Up Radio, was very entertaining, especially in the middle of the night when Izuku stayed up to work on his projects. He tucked his legs closer to himself when the crowd of aspiring hero students left the classroom to take their exam. His head stayed down, not wanting anyone to notice him. The chattering slowly faded away. He released a breath once the hallway was empty, and he happily continued working on his design. A while had passed before he heard footsteps coming his way. Assuming it was his brother and future classmates returning from their exam, or a staff member walking to their destination, he continued working, grabbing some extra paper to write down some ideas for coding. He wanted to see if he could implement some of his coding from his digital watch into the support item. A shadow overfell him, but he ignored them. He would have to tweak the coding from the digital watch to suit present mix patrol route and his hero agency, and perhaps a few extra features that could connect to various radio stations, including his own. Hello? Are you lost? Izuku looked up, way up, to see a ginger-haired man. Power loader, his mind supplied. No, he replied before continuing with his design. There was silence for a moment, and Izuku was grateful for it, though it would be better if the pro hero could leave him. He brought his necklace to his mouth. The pro hero's eyes were piercing into Izuku's hunched form, and he curled himself closer in an effort to appear smaller and thus suggest to the pro hero to leave him alone. It had the opposite effect as the man sat beside him. Izuku made the executive decision to ignore him. Power Loader whistled from his left. That's impressive, kiddo. I'm sure Present Mike would love it. Izuku's right hand paused and he lowered his pencil. He spread out the pages on the floor, unfolding several papers and placing them in the proper order, gathering his thoughts. His directional speaker could be more streamlined with less wiring if it implemented more digital aspects. It'd be a less obvious weak point and dash. He stopped, the ghost of his father's hand on his shoulder. Power Loader pulled some papers closer to him to inspect, humming every so often. He didn't seem put off by Izuku's sudden stop in mumbling. These are really good. Is this the code for it? Izuku nodded, continuing to chew on his necklace to prevent more words escaping him. Do you have more support items in your notebook? He asked. Izuku handed it over unthinkingly before instantly regretting it. He didn't know if he would get the book back, but he couldn't just ask to have it back after giving it away. Majima Higuri had seen a lot of talent come through UA, but this kid was really something else. He appeared young, but his mind could take something that already existed and alter it to make it better in ways that seemed obvious now that he was looking at the kid's designs. And looking over his code, it was evident he had put many hours into learning the technological language and was able to implement it well. He could only imagine what he could do with a little bit of nurturing. What's your name, kiddo? The kid wiggled in his spot, refusing eye contact as he had throughout their whole conversation. Todoroki. Todoroki Izuku. Higuri recognized the kid now that he had a name. The curly pink hair was a giveaway now, as you would have to be living at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean to not know this kid and his family. His brother was currently taking the recommendation exam for heroics, destined to become a top hero, and his father, of course, was number 2 in the country. While he had thought the child's name was Deku, he must have read the kanji wrong or heard the insult in an interview somewhere. He made a mental note to never call him the wrong name. But it still begged the question, if he wasn't taking the heroics exam, what was he doing here? Higuri looked at the notebook in his hands once more before rising to his feet. You ever been in a shop, kiddo? Todoroki slowly shook his head. Come with me,